Okay, so we're gonna call to order the Tuesday, February 6th special meeting of the Sanitary District Number 2 Board of Directors, and this is a public workshop. Can we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Casisa.
Here.
Board Member Lee.
Here. Board
Member Thomas. Here. Vice President Ravazio. Here. President Beckman.
Here, thank you. Please join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to our staff.
Great. Thank you, Board President Beckman and members of the board. Brianna's going to be putting up a PowerPoint, but as maybe you can see, we have a slightly different arrangement for you today. This is a special meeting, but we're also treating it more like a workshop. And so we're hoping we have some visitors via Zoom and perhaps some more people that can come in person. But the idea is to kind of have a little bit more of a free-flowing conversation, to have more chances for feedback from the public. So I want to start by introducing a few folks. So I'm not sure, we've got people on panelists, we might want to bring them over, but for now I'll start with town staff. So Adam Wolf, town manager. Fernanda Stefanik, she's our product manager, focuses primarily on Sanitary District 2. She was leading the master plan effort for the town. Online, I don't know if we have him yet.
MJ.
We have Chris Brothers. He'll wave when he gets here. He was leading the consultant effort for the master plan. And then, so turn it over to Craig Hill, NHA Advisors, and I may have his team member on there as well, Leslie Bloom.
Right.
And also Jorn, who is with Reptelis, who was also, they're the ones who set up the financial model, which we'll show later in this presentation. Next slide, please. Or is there a clicker?
Yeah.
Sure. So first off, just want to cover the agenda. I know we want to be considerate of everyone's time. There's a lot to cover. And so there's a number of public comment and question sections. This could be board members and public. And then we'd like you to comment specifically on what we've covered up to that point or within each section. And also we'll have a wrap-up discussion with the Sanitary District Board at the very end. Next slide, please. So here's a quick background on the Sanitary Sewer Master Plan and rates. The last sewer master plan was completed in, completed in 2009. Thank you. And the rates were last increased in 2010. So, it's been quite some time. Since then, there was a second master plan effort that did some significant amount of closed circuit television work around town in 2014 and did provide the town with some information about which key infrastructure projects to focus on, but it was never adopted as a formal master plan. In general, that should, say decreasing, or sorry. I think this should be decreasing inflow and infiltration into the aging system requires a comprehensive sanitary sewer master plan. So what we're trying to do is make sure our pipes are as sealed as possible, limit the amount of rainwater that gets brought in. That helps when we have large storm events and allows the treatment plant to fully process the water that comes through versus having to get blended and bypassed because of the amount of volume it can't handle. In 2021, we launched the effort with GHD Consultants, and they have been running with the sewer master plan update. And most recently, we presented the draft master plan in October of 2023 at the Sanitary District Board meeting.
Is on.
Um, this one, right?
We'll just go through the
Okay,
next slide.
okay. Next. Okay, so as part of the master plan effort, these were some of the key goals. Evaluate existing conditions of our infrastructure. In 2020, we had to create a settlement agreement with the environmental conservancy group called Riverwatch. And there were several things that we are legally required to deliver within specified time ranges. We'll get to that. We upgrade our whole GIS database to make it, very more useful and kind of cutting edge. Everything is in a program that can be viewed on a computer versus paper files that are, the old school file system. As part of this process, we knew we wanted to develop a defensible CIP so that if a major event did occur, we can sit there with our files with the regional board and other regulatory agencies and say, these are all the measures we've done. Even though something happened, we did X, Y, and Z. Perform a rate study analysis, which we're here to discuss today. And then also we looked at vulnerabilities related to sea level rise. So part of the requirements of this Riverwatch 2020 settlement agreement were inspect all gravity sewer lines with data from within 10 years. So that involves putting a camera into all of these gravity pipes and then watching the videos and looking for defects. Conduct a desktop study of force mains and pump stations, looking at as-built and other records available to determine, based on the age, how serviceable or how much service life do they have remaining. And then invest at least $5 million over 5 years on structural 5 pipes, which is the worst category, and we will get to that. Next slide, please. Okay. Image isn't coming through, but basically it was just a slide showing kind of the 2 main phases of the master plan effort. One was a lot of documentation review, a lot of in-field analysis of existing conditions, and then separately that was all put into a model, and there's a lot of review and detail on kind of what the priorities are based on all the deficiencies. Next slide, please. There we go.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, second. There you go. So, yeah. So 20 miles of CCTV had to be captured in 2021. And that also was combined with previous similar mileage from 2014. And that all had to be viewed, watched in the recording, and inspected. Like I said, on the other side, a lot of analysis of the information. Thanks. So evaluating gravity sewers, as mentioned, 20 miles were captured as part of this effort. We have 45 miles total. The balance was done in 2014. So a lot of effort and manpower went into this exercise for the method. Next. And along the way, if you have any clarifying questions, please feel free to ask, but there will be specific times for comment as we move through the different sections. All right, just very quick, go back 1 slide, please. This is just a quick image showing kind of the whole process of how, video gets sent down a pipe and then it gets relayed up to a van where it gets recorded and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. These are some of the rating systems, 1 through 5. So again, 5 being the worst. So these are some of the images of what you would expect them to look like. Collapsed pipe, basically requires immediate action. This one has a deep sag, so water isn't flowing as well. And then so on and so forth as you get to excellent, where very little defects, if none at all. And then there's everything in between. So after inspecting and reviewing the CCTV data. This is basically a summary by category of our pipe condition. So you'll see this kind of breaks down in imagery of, a lot of the sections. We identified some public work zones, and so with only 5 grading the worst, we've got 7 million, 7.3 million in work to do there. We've got 5s and less than 5, 11 million, 4s, 5.1. So it just kind of shows just on the gravity sewer, there's a need for the investment of additional funding. Second, we started looking at our pump stations. So the triangles here that you see on the screen, those are pump stations that are scattered all around the district in key locations to make sure that everything is pumped properly. Obviously, effluent doesn't go uphill, so where you're in a low spot, you've got to use pump stations to get it to a point where it can then be gravity or gets forced all the way to the next pump station or system. These blue lines are what we call force mains. Force main is basically just a pressure pipe. Next step. So on these, because these are pressurized systems, you can't just open them up and drop a camera in them. That would be shutting down, what is a high volume system for a long time. It's high risk, very expensive, not kind of the industry standards. So for these, that's where we relied on previous documents as well as kind of as-built, really kind of looking at the age of infrastructure. And then we did also do a field evaluation of pump stations and looked at individual parts to just see level of corrosion, other factors to identify, of these, like which ones are at the end of their service life. Slide, please. So as you can see, there's a number of improvements, and the consultant put these into categories. One being kind of top priority, moving down the list of 5. And as you can see, there's 2 at our biggest pump station, Paradise Pump Station, that are kind of now. And then we've got 50 spread out over the next 2 years between Paradise Pump Station, Trinidad, Campbell Bishop, and a couple others, and so on and so forth. And that was kind of used to set up a priority and ranking system for our capital improvement budget. Next slide. Taking those priority ranks and then ranking the pump station projects and then associated dollar amounts. As you move left to right, you'll see Paradise Pump Station is our top priority for pump station at $8.7 something million. That is already in design at about 90%. This was an urgency effort that we brought to the board, I want to say about this time last year. And then also right below that, Trinidad, Campbell Bishop are 2 high priority ones. And then there's some components within Village and Fiber that also should happen likely within our 10-year CIP horizon. Next slide, please. So then we move on to some of what I said before was actually put here for force mains. Right, we can't put a camera in, but we can look at when was the pipe installed, what type of pipe was it, when was the valve put in, where is it living? Is it buried? Is it in a vault? How much corrosion has it been exposed to? And then they actually also went into each of these locations using confined space entry safety methods and visually inspect them. And then also in a lot of cases, use some specialty equipment to measure either the amount of epoxy coating or corrosion to help determine which ones need to be prioritized. Next slide. So, yeah, just a quick force main condition summary. Various issues. We have air release valves throughout our system, and these really you put in at high points to let air out so that the full capacitor pipe can run. So many of those are at the end of service life. We have a meter vault on the north side of Madera Creek. That's on our main force main that has a flow meter that's not functional, and some other valves that we don't have, really the confidence to operate, because it's potential if you do try to use them, they get stuck and then you're in a bad situation. So I think we're at a state where if we were to do anything, we would just swap it out rather than to exercise it. And then, yeah, some known corrosion issues throughout the district. Next slide, please. So one of the concepts also that we're going to, it's going to be one of the main considerations and drivers for this is our main force main that goes from our Paradise Pump Station, which is Sanitary Drive, all the way to the north side of Madera Creek. There's zero redundancy, and it handles the bulk of our effluent for the district. I would say, more than 90% probably. And so we're using this as our sole system to move all the effluent to our treatment plant. And along the way, there are valves and many other features that have been in the ground for 30 plus years. So as you imagine, those are near your service life. So how do you swap a valve when you need the force main to be running almost at all times? And what if you have 30, 40 valves that you need to replace? That becomes a very high risk and challenging situation. So that is one of the reasons it came as a recommendation to look at a parallel force main that would be built side by side with the existing one, and would have two benefits. One, it's a redundant one that could be swapped over at any point you have any sort of incident blockage. And then also it would allow you to flop your flows over and service all those valves in a much more low risk systematic fashion versus these, one night shutdowns where everything is just high risk and requires all hands on deck. So the difference between option 1 and 2 is option 1 takes you to the south side of Madera Creek, so not the whole way to the other side. And whereas option 2, which is more expensive by about $6 million, takes you under the creek as well. That pipe that is under the creek is thick-walled HDPE, which is polyethylene like a plastic, so it's not susceptible to erosion. We feel it's still in fairly good shape. So, as part of our analysis, we are leaning toward option 1 being a reasonable recommendation. Next slide, please.
Sorry, just one question on that. For the lengths that are shown for option 1 and 2, it looks like the same length was shown, but one goes under the creek and one doesn't.
Yes, that's a typo.
Okay.
So yeah, option 1 takes you just to the south side of the creek.
Okay, so option 2 is longer.
And option 2 includes the portion on the creek. Good catch.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, now trying to wrap it all together, when we start building a budget, looking at pump station force mains, valves, CFP projects. Actually, sorry, this is just pump station force main and valves. We've got this tier 1 category. So we've got the parallel force main, we've got the meter vault, which is on the north side, which is that one that has the flow meter that's not working, and some other parts that have been in there for a long time that we don't have, valves that we don't have confidence in exercising. And then also when you start adding these, which are kind of what I would call one-time immediate needs, it's not your annual sewer rehab project that you're really gonna attack different parts of the district. You combine that with our settlement agreement of $5 million in structural five pipes, you can quickly get to a rough number of about $27 million in one-time project needs. And so something we'll be talking about is how to address that, and financially, what are our options?
And that 27 million is just for this, right?
Just primarily just those three things
Okay.
that we believe are very, very high priority. Next slide, please. So we then summed up all of the needs across, you know, the pump stations, the force mains, the valves, our gravity system, and our legal requirements. And we came up with 4 strategies here. So, you know, based on current funding, what could we possibly do? And we get about $6.71 million a year in current funding. So we would only get 40 of our 92 projects that we've identified of the structural 5. So we would not likely meet our settlement requirements. Partial tier 1. So we have a split, you know, section of what we've identified as very high priority. And there were no, you know, parallel force main and a lot of high risk work to try to swap out the valves and other things that are on the force main as it's live, using a series of night shutdowns and each time you do a night shutdown, that's a high risk situation. You are using Vector trucks at a point to truck and haul effluent across to the other side of the system as you try and keep the volume down for the well.
Does that doesn't affect residents then, or would it? No.
So they generally would, I mean, we might listen out, hey, you know, construction, please, you know, try to go light on the system, but generally no one's stopping them from, you know, taking a shower or flushing a toilet. But we do it at night because that's when flows are lowest, right? Most people are sleeping.
Is that why the cost goes up because you're doing the work at night versus doing it during the day?
It's not so much that it's, well, I guess that's part of the fun. We would have all hands on deck through the night. We've had to do it a few times since Renee and I have been here in 2018, and it's, you know, we got multiple crew, like double crews from CMSA, got double crews from town, we've got contractor, and we also have Vector truck contractors, and everyone is just watching that wet well, or several wet wells around town, Village, Viper, Paradise, and Trailer Court, all to keep those wet wells down by sucking them down with Vector truck and trucking them over to the other side where they have been pushed back into the system. So it gets costly, but really, I would say the driving concern is just, it's very high risk. And even some of these projects, if you did them we've done them more in an emergency way. If you did them more in a designed and proactive way, there's a lot of environmental regulations that would come into play, and permitting and whatnot, because many of these systems are right near the bay and have the chance to enter the bay if something goes wrong. And you don't really have a whole lot of second shots. There's no widespread notification system that says, hey, everyone, when you guys wake up at 6 a.m., don't take a shower the next day. So it's coming whether you like it or not, so you better have it back up and running. If you don't, you're in a bad situation.
Can we use Nixle or one of the alert systems to actually communicate with residents about the work? Because I think people would cooperate if they knew, but I think getting the information out there is what's hard.
Certainly, that would be something if we really embarked on that. You know, many night shutdowns, high risk night shutdowns, we would do everything we could and probably be a requirement. But even if half or a third of people, you know, cut their shower in half, I don't know that we're still gonna have a major risk. Yeah. But good question. So on the top side, this is the unconstrained category. This is money was no object. This is what we want to spend, 12.67. We realize that's, excessive funding that, we need to be more prudent with public funds. So we then looked at that option 2 scenario first, which was getting the force main all the way to the north side. And that one was 10.4 million average over a 10-year span, but really it's front loaded, and that'll come into play later. So then we ran some initial numbers on that, and we said, hey, that's still higher than we want to be. What can we do more when we really sharpen our pencil? And that's where we said, hey, the force main that goes under the creek, it's HDPE, it's thick wall. We know a lot about it. Doesn't have valves along the way. We think that at this juncture, it's not, it's lower risk of failure. And before at the termination on the south side, we can create some sort of connection point where if we did have an incident, we could then, worst case, run something above ground, a temporary pipe, for instance, if that pipe fit. So that's where this one comes in at 9.78 on average million per year over a 10-year span. Next slide, please. This is the detailed breakdown of that 9.78 million scenario. You can see the amount that's associated with gravity, sewer rehabs. You can see what's vertical, so that's the pump stations. And then you have the all assets, that's a lot of the valves and other things. So also to note here, we have, based on current funding levels, we put about $1.1 million for a private sewer lateral grant program, which gives individual lateral property owners of individual laterals up to $2,500. And then we have just staff O&M costs, and here at the bottom is that summation. Next slide, please. So yeah, just running the numbers, total 10 years, CFP estimate 97.8 million, average that out, 0.8, current value, current revenue is roughly 6.7. So we've got, an annual shortfall of 3.2. And that's just kind of a preliminary rough number for discussion purposes.
And this is at a point in time, right? Doesn't it? Because if some of these projects go out 4 or 5 years, it doesn't include any inflationary factors or anything like that, or escalation in costs, construction costs. Yeah. So, I think most people understand that inflation in the value of a dollar goes up, but it's double because also the cost of construction goes up. So you end up, as you push things out, you end up paying both of those factors by deferring. And if we just back up for a minute, can you just clarify, just for public knowledge, what SD2, what areas that includes? Because it's more than just, so people have an understanding that's not just Corte Madera residents that this is affecting. And I think you may have one slide up there that kind of shows the geographic area.
Right.
I'm sorry, I should have said that in the beginning.
It's okay. Lorena, there's the one on pump stations with the triangles, if you can go back to. I think it's number 11.
Is it that one?
Two more, maybe. Yeah. 11. There, one more. Yes. There you go.
Yeah.
So here, looking at, this is our district map, this peach colored boundary line. So in addition to Corte Madera, we also serve parts of Tiburon, unincorporated Tiburon, Paradise K is a big area that we serve. Likewise, there's a section here of Larkspur. This is kind of industrial zone, and also the unincorporated Greer Bay Boardwalk. And then we also have several pockets of Larkspur up here on the hills. So at this point, I wanted to stop and see if there's any question or comments on the sewer master plan or capital improvement project budget needs. Let me go next slide, please.
Yeah, so for me, and I probably some of the public has that question too. Are the force mains sort of like a pump within a pump, or are they just connecting points?
So the pump station is what creates the pressure, and the force main is more or less the pipe itself, plus valves that help for various reasons. Some might be a check valve to make sure it's one-way flow. It might be an air valve to let air off at high points. So potentially a blow off, if you have sediment that gets stuck in a low spot, you blow it off. So all of these systems are part of the force main package. We did drill down on some of them as like assets is what we call them. But yeah, that's the pipe itself, the pressure pipe itself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where does the $3.2 million a year come from?
We will begin that. That is our next section.
Big
So
question. Okay.
yeah, but absolutely, if there's any other questions, do we have any questions from public about the capital improvement?
We do have people listening in, but no hands raised at this time.
Okay.
I think on one of those slides, I can't remember which one, there's kind of like a tier 2 category. I think it was like 5+, and then there was 5 only. I think the 5 only seems like those are the higher priority ones. There is a possibility that anything I want to say in a tier 2 or lower than that during the next X amount of years could move up into that category, right? That would need to be fixed.
You know, with all infrastructure and pipes as well, you know, they're going to continue to degrade with every year essentially. So, and that degradation is, you know, if it's a metal pipe, it's corroding. If it's even just the plastic pipe or any pipe, it could be sagging, which reduces the amount of capacity and deficiency. So number of other things.
So that brings up a good question for me is ultimately, has technology advanced in the materiality of sewer technology that will extend the life? So it's not just that we're replacing in kind with another 30 years. If it's HDPE, are we actually going to have an improved performative system moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So typically we use almost exclusively C900 pipe, which is you know, heavy duty PVC, capable of handling pressure. We even use that on our gravity systems so that they're really airtight. You know, these are pipes that can hold pressure up to 200, but we're using them for gravity where you might only have 3 pounds pressure on them. Or fused HDPE. So we actually, instead of having a fell and spigot and potential for movement or leaks, we actually fuse it. So it's actually like melted together. So that's another way for it to be kind of airtight. Valves and other things, we use different types of corrosion protection, zinc anodes, oxy coatings, other types of cathodic protection wrapping products to just buy you more time. So there's just some of them, and then same thing goes for pump stations. We're always trying to integrate the best value when it comes to pumps and MCCs, everything we do.
I first just want to call explicitly for anybody who's online to go ahead and just, if you have a question about anything that you've heard so far, please go ahead and raise your hand on Zoom so we can get you on here to ask your question. In the meantime, I had a couple questions as well. One was just inspired by Charles' question. I'm curious, how much of our system that we know of is not even plastic of any kind, but is like old school materials that would be unthinkable nowadays, like terracotta or wood or like metal or whatever?
We do have, a big chunk is the VCP, the terracotta, and I don't know, Fernanda, you have a guess on about how much?
I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but I can pull that up for you for the next meeting.
I would say, what, more than half?
Yeah, more than half.
Oh, wow. Okay. That I was hoping it was going to be like 5%.
So, and just,
wow.
In all transparency, a lot of the pipes that are showing up maybe as 3s very well could be those VCP pipes that are reasonably connected at the bell and spigot. There's no big offset or anything. They're functional, but they are not as tight as, you know, these other pipes that can actually handle pressure.
Okay, that, I'm glad I asked, thank you. Only other question is with regards to the idea of the redundant force main, I'm still, I know we talked about this in October.
Yeah.
Still trying to just wrap my head around, like, I've never heard of a redundant force main. Can you just give us some examples of like, are there like other redundant force mains in the county, or like, is this like a normal kind of state of?
Yeah, I mean, so I sit on the JPA with, you know, we all are part of the JPA with CMSA, and so there's, you know, Ross Valley, Santa Fe, and they actually try to do redundancy, not just in force main, which is the most critical, but even on ground. So, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer where you can create redundancy, you should. And if there's one place to create redundancy, it's on your primary system.
Okay, so other collection agencies in Marin have redundant force main. Okay, I did not know that, so that is very helpful. Thank you.
And then separately, you know, I've kind of asked Amy to maybe, I don't know, give a couple thoughts about, you know, how we, I don't know, what, you know, the risk to the district of not building in redundancy and the potential of something major happening.
Amy Ackerman, Town Attorney Board Counsel. Good evening. Both federal and state law regulate water and set standards for water quality. And state law governs both surface water and groundwater. And as part of our efforts to keep our water clean and our drinking water safe, you know, there's a pretty strict regulatory system that regulates water discharge requirements, whether it goes into the ground or whether it goes into the bay. And the sanitary district is subject to a state permit that sets out what the requirements are. And the main point I'm going to make is that, you know, penalties for violating it are pretty severe and can add up very, very quickly. So overflows can be subject either a civil penalty by a daily basis or by a per gallon basis. So you can see how it would add up very quickly. So a daily penalty of up to $5,000 for each day a violation occurs, or $10 per gallon of waste discharged. They can also take some other enforcement actions as well, but the civil penalties can add up quickly. And in 2012, the Ross Valley Sanitary District had to pay over 1.5 million in fines. So it can be really costly. The other factor that Corte of Madera needs to be aware of is that the district entered into a settlement agreement with Riverwatch. They have previously filed an intent to file suit under clean water for discharges. And so the settlement agreement has certain conditions that the district has to comply with. The district is in full compliance with that. However, I would expect that if we're not taking action to prevent these overflows, and should an overflow happen, there'd be legal action from Riverwatch, and likely that would be quite costly as well. And I'd say that the fines that the state issue, the water board issue, you know, that's the actual fines. It doesn't add up the staff time and attorney time and sort of all the accompanying baggage that comes with being fined. So we take water quality seriously. The federal government does, California does as well, and so compliance is really important.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. So, don't quote me on the exact number. The Ross Valley incident that led to $1.5 million firm fines was in the order of magnitude of $50,000, whereas the force main in Paradise is close to 1 million gallons a day. So if you had an incident where you were down for 3 days, that's upwards of 3 million times $10 a gallon. So big dollars, big headlines, all the above. It's in reality probably It's not, I mean, it's really right at the top of number one priorities for any sanitary sewer district is, you know, be responsible environmentally, don't have spills, right? Treat the water, treat that effluent. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you mentioned before, on the lateral grant program, we budget $1.1 million or so. How much of that money gets used? Is it the whole $1 million, or is it?
We're using the bulk of it. And a lot of that is, right, we've got the 4 tiers, but across the program, we're using bulk of it.
Okay, thanks.
So I had a question. You know, we talked about infiltration as one of the reasons that we're looking at that. Infiltration, in my mind, is water and things that are getting into the pipes that aren't just the things that were supposed to be in the pipes. Is that correct?
Yep.
So then when we did the evaluation, these 4s and 5s, it's not just, is it just the physical capability, like the leak aspect, or is it the breaking aspect, or is it a little bit of both, right? So in the end, as we invest in longer term, better back sealed, less infiltration systems, does that mean we pay for less, you know, in destination? And then also, does that mean that there, you know, it reduces the total liability basically on our system across the board, right? Like that, I mean, that's really part of it. Is there a way to tangibly understand that it's not just a cost, but an investment, and what's the investment payback?
Yeah.
Right?
So specific to structural 5s, I mean, that's like, it's block. You got massive root ball, you've got a collapsed pipe, you've got some foreign object in there. But certainly as you get into 3s and 4s, and if you have enough of them, those cracks, those joints that are off that allow water in, is primarily what we're concerned about. That's, you know, groundwater, you know, bay water, storm water, all going into the sewer system that is, we're paying to pump it, we're paying to treat it, and in times of big storms, if there's enough of it, it overwhelms the treatment plant, and they have to bypass percentage as blended water. It still goes through some filtration, but not the full array that you would want under less peak conditions.
Is that those big basins sometimes you see in different facilities where they can kind of overflow into these temporary?
Yeah, those are probably some of it's that. Those are a lot of times there's kind of a mechanical filtration, there's a full biological filtration, there's a whole number of steps, and you know, a lot of the organisms that are part of the biological treatment, it's without getting too far in the weeds, you're kind of constrained by your minimal days, and then which also constrains you on your maximum days, because you have to have a certain number of organisms that can manage.
You need enough food for it, is basically.
Yeah, and you need enough food for it to manage it on throughout your low days, and then the amount of organisms that you have. There's a limit on the high end.
All right. So balancing it out is
in some ways you could
searches makes it for a healthier system functionally as a biodigester type.
You couldn't just put a second CMSA treatment plant and say solution solved, because it wouldn't be able to function because of the biological issues I just mentioned.
Got it.
Yeah.
I have a question about, sure. Please, you go ahead.
It's just sort of catching up, I guess, but
yeah.
On that slide with the blue line, which is the proposed new capital improvement project, how does that relate? Because I believe it was Sanitary District 2 just completely rebuilt all of the sewers on Redwood Highway North, and we lived through that over the last couple of years. Yeah. Really nice job on cleaning up all the spurious old things.
Right.
Is that going to replace that, or is this going to be tearing up the whole road of Redwood Highway? What are we talking about here?
Are you talking about, I think you're talking about like the pavement,
The blue line, where is?
The,
this-
the second force main.
the force main, yeah, so it is gonna be potentially on Redwood Highway unless there's a different alignment. So that, yeah, it would be, basically between Paradise Pump Station, which is next to the bike shop on San Clemente, all the way to the south side of Corte Creek. And we would have to explore alignment options.
And what was just done is not part of the force.
That was just rehabbing the existing system. And that was not the force main, that was the gravity system that then gets to the pump station where it then sends it into the force.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned it, that was a big project, several months, several $1 million, but only a mile maybe of pipe rehab, with gravity served pipe rehab, and you have to get 44 miles. So when I say one-time funds, these are these kind of unique projects. They don't count for the other annual projects, but we just get to keep going and going because as we're improving pipes, other pipes are reaching the end of their service life. It's just a big cycle.
I just had a question about back to the organisms that the water gets away. I'm fascinated by that. Do these do the plants, sorry, the processing plants,
yeah,
do they populate the organisms or are they just naturally occurring that they make a place for them to propagate?
Yeah, there's only so much expertise I have in this area, but they basically through different mediums and with surface area, they create a habitat that is promoting them. So
I think it's some of both is what I've sort of gathered from working at CMSA.
Yeah.
How do you, just on a high level, how do you tee these projects up when you have multiple, you have gravity mains, pump stations? How do you start with the pump station and just work your way down through gravity, or just on a high level, do you attack one and then go after the other?
Well, this was the effort that really helped map that out, right? We looked at our whole gravity system by itself. Hey, what would you put the tier at? What's tier 1, tier 2, 3? And same thing, pump station. And if it came back and it said, hey, you've got, 50 million in pump stations and 10 million gravity, then so be it. That's what we follow and we prioritize accordingly. But if it's spread out, that's fine too. But ultimately, we're just going for the weakest link or the most benefit based on the goals of the district, which, like I mentioned at the top, it's reliability, environmentally conscious, all those good things.
So within those three categories, the worst of the worst, you're looking at the worst within those three categories. Start on that first.
Yeah. So for a lot of these funding centers, we're maybe dabbling into tier 2. We might be picking off a few specific things, but we're not even getting to tier 2 with this funding strategy. We're really attacking the tier 1 priorities.
Okay. Any hands up online?
No hands up online.
Okay.
All right. So now we're going to move into the rate analysis and funding strategies. So first, I'm going to start with a little rate history. So the last rate increase was in 2010, brought our fees up to $498. We had our RAP tell us our rate study consultant apply a construction escalation index for the Bay Area on top of just general inflation. And if you took that same value and worked it through time, it's $792 today. That's what $498 would have been to the district back in 2010. So, on one hand, it's great we haven't had to raise rates. On the other hand, we're at a point where we do now, and so I guess as we get into it, there will be the question of, hey, why didn't we raise them sooner? And part of that discussion is when Fernando and I started in 2010, we actually started with a surplus of like $12 million in reserve for the sanitary district. So it's hard to go make a strong case and a reasoning for we need more money when you've got 12 million and you're not spending it. So we've now drawn that surplus down. We still have emergency reserve, but we've drawn our capital surplus down. And in light of the master plan and identifying all these needs, this is why this is important to have this rate study discussion now.
Do you know why there was such a large surplus back then?
I think primarily limited staffing. I just looking at the numbers, I think there were a couple people in engineering, and now we've got 6. So we're able to do a lot more projects.
Okay, but over time that 12 million is dwindled, correct?
Yeah, we're basically on a year-over-year basis. If we kept the status quo, we don't have a surplus.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why does have a surplus when ultimately we had action taken against us on our sewer?
Sorry, let me be careful.
I mean, if I brought a
Capital surplus. We have emergency reserve, 2.5 million, but beyond that, we don't have a capital surplus. Very important.
You're probably going to get to this, but is it possible to just set in an annual CPI adjustment for the sewer rate so that it automatically adjusts to whatever the inflation rate is to keep us more current?
So
This sounds like
the state rules only allow you to look at 5 years at a time.
okay.
So if you want to do that, you can, but you need to formally go back
Every
through the
5 years
process
and
to re-up it. Yes.
okay.
Good question. And then next slide.
Artie, related to the prior part of the presentation, we have a question that's was emailed stating or asking, will this work accommodate the planned 90 to 120 unit development at 4576 Paradise Drive by the city of Tiburon, adjacent to the Trinidad pump station in Paradise K?
So this project has not even taken that to account. I don't even know if we call it a project because it's nothing that's been submitted to us. So this is completely separate.
But can we extrapolate that same question to apply our own housing element? Just, I think the big picture question is whatever we do here, whether it's building redundant force main or any of these other improvements, will those all be designed kind of with our like projected increase in housing in mind?
So, I mean, overall, looking at, the housing element cycle through what, 2028?
31. Yeah.
31. And is it 750? What's the exact number?
Yeah, it's like a mid-thousand.
Yeah, so keeping that in mind, single family residents, we feel we're actually in decent shape for our 10-year horizon.
In terms of like total capacity versus where we expect to be at population wise? Okay.
But when we do go into pump station projects, we do look at that and factor that. But a lot of this work on tailpipes is capacity increasing.
Okay.
Because we've had overflows in recent years in some of these areas. And so for the last, 4 years, we've invested maybe 3 million a year every year to improve capacity on tailpipes, because obviously it's serving a big part of our district.
Also, with new units, is there like it's a new like sewer, is there a fee assessed that is above and beyond what would be our annual fee to add those new capacity, like 750?
The way our rates would read is just there's no annual
connection
fee.
Right. There's no annual. There's just connection fee would
one
apply
time.
if you had a separate connection to the main.
Right. So we built 300 new units. They're assessed $3,000 per new connection, right? One time to start the process, right? So there's new income that comes in to help.
Well, actually, of the 3,000 roughly,
or whatever,
like 2,500 of that is a CMSA fee connection. Ours is only $500.
Oh.
So
You probably covered this, but in addition to housing, like if the hotel or the Best Western, if that ever got built, also there's capacity for that also.
yeah. So yeah, because they've submitted an application, because it's been reviewed by the town and the sanitary district, that has been factored into our infrastructure. And so same thing goes with Robin Drive. They had to upgrade the size of several segments of the town's sewer mains in order for us to approve that project. So we had a consultant review it from a capacity. Hey, if you introduce this much volume, can we serve you? And the answer is yes, but this section is too close. We need you to upgrade this. And so they didn't.
And I know
I would just, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I know we brought up Corte Madera housing element. I don't know if you looked at either Tiburon, which was kind of mentioned earlier, potential project there, Larkspur, and then anything with the county with the boardwalk, if there's any projects out there. Again, if the capacity, because again, I think we're focusing just on Corte Madera, but it's a broader area.
I mean, as part of the housing element, part of our award-winning environmental review document actually did analyze, impacts on new housing on all utility systems. When we get a new project, we would have to reevaluate whether that sort of finding within the housing element environmental impact report still holds. And we do, I think basically it was, you check at that time, they'd certainly have to upgrade their sewer system for that particular property, but you reevaluate whether the environmental findings still holds for that particular development at that time and run it through that environmental analysis.
And they do upgrade some of public utilities too for sizing, like Robin Drive, they update section of our sewer for upsizing that section too.
Yeah, another scenario could be that, they're only allowed to put so much volume and flow rate at any one time, and they have to have some sort of, buffering system on their side, right? So, but again, really, there's so many projects speculated until they are actually turned into projects, until they actually are submitted to the district. That's when we do our engineering analysis. And if it says that this project we can only serve you if you also contribute this much and fix these segments, then that's the outcome, and that's what we require.
Do those get submitted when they go to planning?
Yeah. So they will, as part of the application process, it'll get routed to all the town departments, but also Sanitary too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would a project like that, let's say, you're bringing in a new housing units and it's clear that it's going to impact the sewer line. So they pay the fee. Is that work done right away? Or is it done by the time that project is built? Or
it would be part of the conditions of approval, and they wouldn't get occupancy until it's done.
and they are responsible for having
They pay
it
for
done.
Navigation.
Yep. And again, it's for us, it's an objective exercise. The engineering is the engineering, and so if it's a segment, if it's 5 segments and a pump station, whatever it is, that's what it is. And we do that early in the process so they know that cost when they choose to embark on the development. So kind of going back to historical or current sewer rates, actually, we did what's called a rate survey of the other jurisdictions or many of the other jurisdictions in the region. Here's our current rate here at $498. This dash one is what, if it had been inflated, what it would be. Here are the other districts around us. So we're actually currently one of the lowest, and you can see where many of the other ones are average roughly around 1,200 to 1,300. One thing I do want to point out, just for people who want to get into the specifics on these, some sanitary districts have a hybrid fee where they have a base value plus a second fee based on volume. And oftentimes that's your their potable water service, which indicates how much water you are putting into the system. It's not your summer because that's when your irrigation might be going. It's winter when hopefully your irrigation's off. And so some of them combine both those two factors to create their annual fees. we just have a flat fee. So you may pull one of these, and I forget which ones are the hybrid ones, and say, wait, I looked on their webpage and this was, 600. But if you look at the fine print, they have a hybrid fee, they have a secondary fee based on capacity. So we took an average of their volumes across the district, applied it at their rate to come up with stuff.
So it's not possible to measure usage on an individual property address of the sewer system. You can't tell who's using it more, or you can by household.
So we have flow meters at at 4 of our pump stations. And there are different flow meter devices, but really from a feasible standpoint, not for residential.
So it's more like for that pump station, you have usage.
But again, the more common metric that's used is your winter potable water usage.
So with that, that's still a zoned understanding of infiltration and overall kind of inputs into the system. Is there such a disparity between the different pump stations to warrant an understanding of high use kind of application to those zones that are utilizing the system more than others, or is it across the board pretty even, and so therefore the fixed rate is the appropriate approach?
I'm spot on with this exactly answer it, but we also do look at our summer. So we moved to a system instead of 1 flow meter at the north side of the Corte Creek to 4 separate. That also allows us to have data points for 4 different pump stations in town. And so when we compare winter weather flows, right, that would show when we have a lot of tidal or rain, and we compare that to summer, that's an indicator of how much I you have in that zone. And generally what we found is it's the areas that have low groundwater, a lot of these historic floodplain areas.
Get more infiltration into it.
Okay. And with that, this is a point in time I want to reintroduce Craig Hill and his team. They've been really crunching some of the using the model prepared by Raptellis, kind of helping us weave through some options. And then I'll let him take it away. But primarily, we're going to discuss a scenario where we finance this just with our annual rates and rate increases, or another where we look at strategies with bonding to do a revenue bond to fund some of these big one-time projects up front that really they're designed to serve 30+ years, and so should be spread out across 30 years worth of ratepayers versus just paying them, right up front using the current payers. So take it away, Craig. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, RJ. Good evening, Craig Hill, NH Advisors. We're based out of Centerville and have worked with the town and the sanitation district going back. I think my first project here was probably 25 years ago. So back then, to some of the history with the district, everything was getting paid with cash. And RJ's right. I think this is going back to the George Mormon days. So we're going way back. There were projects that needed to get done that just for physical reasons couldn't get done because you couldn't get a project manager to focus on it. So there were times where the balances were really high on the district side and they were really low on the town side, and it was kind of treated as one, but they were definitely in different buckets. So, the way that we want you to think about this whole project, and RJ did a really good job going through the technical side, right? The capital side, the project side is from a policy perspective, the first thing you have to think about is, well, how important are these projects? We've prioritized them, but do we still really need to do them or we don't? And I will say we do work statewide, and there is a lot of conversation around, well, let's just kick the can. Like, we can't afford this. We don't want to raise rates. Do we really need to do this? Can't we just deal with it when it breaks? And I think RJ did a good job talking about what happens on a sewer side when things break. We were doing work for Ross Valley when they were paying those fines, and then They were very ugly board meetings we were having just right across the creek back then. So, you know, we think about this in three buckets. You've got the project side and how much the engineers are telling you it's going to cost. Then you've got the bucket that you have to think about, well, okay, how do we want to pay for those? And then you think about it, well, how does that impact our customers, right? Our constituents. And so Roftelis has built this very sophisticated rate model that has looked at over an extended period of time, all of the costs of operating the district. And that is labor, that is utilities, that is chemicals, it's everything that goes into it. And then there's an entire capital component. So how big is the number? How much do you need each year? And do we have any ability to shift or move some of these project components around so maybe they don't hit all at the same time? The approach that I think staff has taken is prioritization based on, you know, how critical are these projects. So it's less about, well, can't we just do the cheap ones first and then maybe do the expensive ones later? It's really been much more systematic, which we support, and saying, okay, which ones are the critical ones that we need to do? So from that, and from that model, we then took all of that data and started to really look at, okay, what does it look like to pay for it? And what kind of impact does that have on your rate structure? So as you just saw from that prior graph, you haven't raised rates in a long time. And I will say from working with a number of the other districts, when you saw that graph and you saw where you are relative to everybody else, it isn't that you shouldn't think about it that everybody else is more expensive. They're just further along in this process of addressing their capital needs. So the big one is treatment plants, right? You're a member in the regional treatment plant. But if you're a district that has to go out and spend $100 million on a plant, you just know your rates are going to be, you know, 4 times what they are now, just because you all of a sudden had to stomach that project. And that's something that when you're on the low end of those rates, it just means you just haven't done those projects that everybody else has done. So that's a lot of times, well, they just have expensive rates because they just want to charge higher rates. It's usually more a function of the capital. So do you have the slides? Okay, so the way we think about how to pay for these projects is, and we're going to give you the extremes. So we can certainly get to somewhere in the middle. But the first one is you're anti-debt. You're of the mindset that when I want to buy a house, I'm going to save up until I have enough money to buy the house, and then I'm going to buy the house. So we call it, pay as you go, pay with cash. Create a budget based on rates that can generate the kind of money you need year over year to pay whatever the costs of doing all of those projects is, right? So it's think about it as a car. I'm going to save $50,000 before I go out and buy my first car. The other side is financing it. And obviously when you're financing it, it's just like a mortgage, you're going to borrow a big chunk of change. You're going to be able to have the cash to pay for the projects, and then you're going to pay it back over time, right? And as RJ alluded to in the intro, the big thing about that is there's kind of social equity in who's benefiting from these projects. We use the slurry seal concept on a road. Well, you want to go in and make somebody's street look nice. If you're just slurry sealing it, it's probably benefiting the homeowners there for maybe the next 5 years. But if you're actually going in and grinding and rebuilding the street that's going to last 30 years, do you really want the homeowners that are there today to pay the full cost if when they sell in 5 years, somebody else gets to benefit from that? So we think from a policy perspective, you really want to determine the useful life of these improvements, and then think about, okay, well, how can we set the repayment or the payment of those project improvements such that everybody in their rate is paying their fair share over time, right? And you could say, well, I don't want it to be 30 years. I just want these projects to be paid for over 20 years. So you have all kinds of flexibility in the financing. But from a philosophical perspective, I think the board needs to be thinking about this as, do we want to create rates that are going to deal with all of these projects that RJ just went through, or at least the critical ones, right? That first tier. And we just have to find a rate, whatever it needs to be, to let staff have the funds they need to pay this over the next 5 years. Or tell us how much we need to budget, figure out how to finance that, and then pay it, you know, more leisurely over time. So that's really the two, I want you to think about that as kind of your two ends of the barbell for what we're going to talk about next. So the one way we looked at it, and again, this is the kind of the social equity perspective, is scenario one is you issue debt to cover all of the priority projects that RJ went through. And we know it's going to take time. So we're not saying you're going to borrow all the money today, stick it in the bank, and then you know, take 5 years to do it. So we tried to dilute the pressure of, you know, borrowing over what we'll call two buckets, right? We do a first series in fiscal year 24-25, should you move forward on this, and then a couple years later, you know, whatever the balance is that you need for the projects we do. So for our modeling, we assume two. We did amortize each of them out over 30 years. So try to just be conservative in the assumption. And you can see what would effectively happen is we would need to raise rates for the next 3 years. So this would be all part of a rate increase or a rate process that we'll talk about in a little bit. But the preliminary estimates based on the modeling are such that we would need 3 years of rate increases of 20% and then 7.5 on the back end. And that would just deal with the first 5 years, but that gets a substantial amount of your critical projects done.
I'm sorry, I may be getting ahead of you. I don't want to. Are you going to be showing numbers on that so we have an understanding of we're 498 now and over those 5 years, what that looks like?
Yeah. So do you see that last bullet?
Yeah. Okay.
So what this does to the number is it takes it from roughly 500 to 1,000.
Okay.
With this particular rate structure, and we'll do a comparison here because I'm going to show you the exact opposite, right? So this is if you chose to, one, go forward on the projects as proposed by staff at the dollar amount that was laid out, which is roughly needing $25 to $27 million. Two, you want to basically finance that as opposed to come up with cash. You're going to need to potentially have rates somewhere similar to that in terms of rate increases. And it would, over 5 years, double the sewer rate from $500 to $1,000.
And then what kind of rate would be paid? Just if it's right now, what kind of rate would we be paying on those bonds?
You're probably at 4%.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're a strong credit. I mean, when we did the
pension obligation bonds,
when you did the pension obligation bonds, that was
2.99.
That's my question is it the same as the town or is it a separate?
Yeah, great. That's a great question.
And so therefore, does it have two different bond ratings?
You will have a different rating because this, so when the town did the pension obligation and when they also did the property purchase, those were both done as general fund, and you also did your town hall. So those are secured by the budget and the general fund operations of the town, right? In this case, it's based solely on net revenues of the district. And I wasn't going to mention this, but just since we have the board here today, if you choose to issue sewer revenue bonds that would pay for this project, one of the covenants that you make to your investors or to the bondholders, and they may be locals, they may be somebody in New York, but you basically take on the responsibility saying, we will, because it's only the revenues of the operation that pay the bondholder back or pay off the debt, you will raise rates, whatever you need to make sure that you have enough money to make that. You control that mechanism through a rate increase. So you don't get to voluntarily say, well, you know, we didn't change rates for 13 years, 14 years. You know, we're not, after we do this little 5, we're not doing that again. There will be a legal covenant that the board will take action to, if it turns out you start running short on paying debt service, that you would have to address that through a rate increase process. So that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it is a totally different credit than what the town has used before.
And then, I'm sorry, these rate increases, they only cover the bonds, right? If they don't cover any type of like ongoing maintenance.
No, this is, that's really good. So this is what the rate model says you need to continue to do
General maintenance.
the general maintenance, some of the other CIP, all of the operational costs, the staffing increases that would be required to do these this is all in.
Okay.
Right, so this is what it takes to basically.
All of our tier 1 priorities in each of those categories: gravity, force main, valves, and then also I mentioned pump stations, and then also
CMSA.
well, operating in CMSA funds that we have to contribute there, and then also the river watch obligation.
Okay, if I can remember that if we topped out at 1,000 for, I know it's all projected and stuff like that. I think that still puts us in a lower tier compared to other districts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that, so we showed earlier the average based on our rate analysis and all those, you saw there were a dozen agencies that were factored in that in the region. There were probably some that weren't, but it was right at high 1,200 for today. And we're saying in 5 years, 1,004.
Right.
Approximately, we're gonna, depending on this discussion, everything gets fine-tuned and brought back in a formal fashion.
Right, and then to a resident, it's a gradual increase. It's not like they're getting hit all at once.
Correct. Right. It's going, first year, it's going to step up from 500, add 20% to that.
Right.
Right. So,
right, but it's more like this versus that.
Right, exactly.
So just question, is it necessary to make the whole thing work to front load it as much as we are, where you've got 60% increases in the first 3 years and then only an additional 15 in the last 2? Is there a way to even it out a little bit, or does that set everything off?
So there are financial mechanisms you can do to feather that in. I would not say that you're gonna, if that is what is that, 75%, if I'm doing my math right, we won't get to divided by 5.
Yeah.
It might bring the 20% down to 18 or something like that. It's really a function of meeting the cash flow,
right?
Because there's a lot of demand on cash early on that is not only just being covered by bonds, but by the net revenues.
But you would look at that in detail as you move forward to figure out, because the equity issue and everything, it's kind of our fault that we let the rates stay so low for as long as we did. And I want to make it as fair as we can for those who will have.
Yeah, and so a big part is the critical projects that were identified in the master plan. The technical review was that we really have close to $27 million that need to happen in the next couple of years.
Right.
Paradise Pump Station at $8.5 million, meter vault $1.1 million, $5 million in Riverwatch settlement, Paradise Force Main at $11 million. Those are really considered critical things that we should do, in the next 2 years.
So that for that reason, we need to front load the money coming in. Okay, got it.
See, I have a different question to that. In my mind, you're also talking about doing a prospectus and going out to potential investors that are going to dictate a payment schedule and they're going to want to see it go up to the final payment schedule sooner than later, right? So to make it a good bond offering and make sure that they have the surety of the investment early on, having it front loaded makes it a more attractive buy on the open market, maybe?
Good question. So the town and the district will control the bond structure. So if I'm just going to throw numbers out there, if we're borrowing $27 million over 3 years or 30 years, let's just say debt service is $1.5 million a year, right? And you could say, well, we want to feather the rates, so can we just pay $1 million a year back? So less principal, still pay the interest, but we'll pay less principal back for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then pay more principal starting in year 4. So we can structure it that way. You will pay a higher interest rate, right? Because you're deferring principal. So those investors are going to say, well, if I have to wait longer to get paid back, you know, I want 10 basis points or a 0.25%, whatever it is. So we get to control the initial structure. The market controls the interest rate that you pay, right? So we want the rating to be as high as possible. We want the coverage to be as strong as possible. So to the rates, we want to make sure those rates get approved at a comfortable cash flow, net revenue, and then we call it coverage. But you know, the market's going to charge you an interest rate based on what they believe when they review the prospectus and say, okay, yeah, looks like you're getting a little tight here with how close you can cut those rates. And we have had utility districts who have, you know, going against the recommendation of their rate consultants and said, yeah, we don't like 20%, we want to just do 15.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get squeezed on, well, we can't borrow as much as you need to pay for the project. So now you're back to, well, now we're shrinking the size of the capital program. And that's why I say you've got 3 buckets here, right? You've got the rates and your customers, you've got the financing or how you're going to pay for the projects, and then you've got what projects are you actually going to do. So you're kind of juggling all 3 of these as you go through it. So I'd like to just so this is the one side, right? This is how to finance the actual capital. And I'm going to show you the exact opposite, where you say, I'm adamantly opposed to issuing debt, don't want to pay anybody any interest. We're going to just figure out how to pay for the same business plan, the same capital, but now we're going to just do it through rates, right? Where we're going to come up with the cash that we need over the next 5 years to pay the same amount of projects.
And just to confirm, it's a fixed rate for the 30 years of the bond, once it's established.
Yeah, these are not variable. You don't have to refinance them. You don't have to reset the rate.
It's all set.
I'm sorry, most of these are 30 years. Because I know the scenario you have is 30 years.
So that's on the, 1,000 gets us the bond and the initial 27 million, but is there then the multiplier of ongoing increase for staff and general maintenance that would increase above that 1,000, or is that for the next 30-year outlay? It's just $1,000 a year after the first 5 years.
This is a 10-year CIP. So this 5-year structure addresses the 10-year CIP to the extent it can, because we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years if materials and labor shoot up for construction, you know,
but the bond component of that next 10-year cycle will be fixed. So,
but this does account for some escalations in, you know, salaries and some general construction and whatnot. But it's possible that, you know, in year 6 we're doing a CPI level increase, a few percent, just to kind of keep on track.
Or you're addressing those lower tier projects right now that are not getting funded in this period of time.
Okay.
Next slide.
Is that?
Yeah. So, but under the financing scenario, and this is, I'm going to play rate consultant here for the Rothtel staff for a second. Part of their modeling is really to identify where your fund balances go for purposes of, and RJ mentioned this in his piece, where you've got your reserves, right? So you want to keep a capital, an operating and maintenance reserve. You know, rainy storms like we have, you've got to deploy staff to go out and fix things, and you also need targeted reserves for capital projects. So you've got the maintenance side, you've got the capital side, and then what we always like to say is, you know, an emergency reserve just for, you know, the unknown. Worst case scenario, we had this up in Lake County where a segment of their service area got detached or broken. The houses they couldn't use, and they basically lost part of their revenue. These folks now all of a sudden weren't paying their bills because they weren't getting the service, and it disrupted, you know, your overhead is amortized across your entire customer base. So basically the bars are at a bare minimum, you need to make sure every year over this 5-year period of time, you're at least the red. The red is really the ground zero or zero. But ideally you're at one of these two blue. We are focusing primarily on this lighter blue, the middle line, as where over a 5, you want the rates to be able to cover all the costs, pay back the bonds, and maintain some kind of a fund balance that is reasonable. So, we're trying to target here. And you can see that, in the early years, and again, this is probably to the 20% rate increases, you're building some balances and then you're drawing them down as the capital projects are getting spent. But we're not falling below the red line, so that's good. And you can see that we're actually starting to build back up as we get towards the end, and we're spending less on the next phase of the CIP.
Are we picking up interest income off those fund balances?
Yeah.
Do we issue?
Yeah, that's built into the bond.
So theoretically, not a lot, but some of that cost is being offset by the interest income, like we maintain balances of 5 million or so over time.
Yeah. And right now, as everybody probably knows, short-term rates are actually, for the first time ever, the town's making real interest earnings on balances that, for the last, seems like 10 years, nobody was making anything on their balances.
The other thing I would point out, another reason why you see the higher fund balance in the early years is, we have these big ticket projects. So do you want to be in a position as a board where you're awarding a $10 million project, but you only have 5 million in the bank, but you're banking that over the course of the project, you're going to be able to pay as you go? Or do you want to have all or close to all of it at the time of award, so you're feeling good?
Well, you have financial risk. If you're the contractor,
but that's part of the situation. I mean,
they all bid. I mean, is that capital project all bid out to one? Is it one bid or is it multi-bid?
Well, I'm kind of breaking them into like 4 potential large projects. Maybe if we split the parallel enforcement into 5, but our Paradise Pump Station, we'd like to bid it ASAP. That's $8.5 million.
And do you go with the prospectus and going to market with a bond? Do you go third quarter of 2024, or can you parse it out and do each bond? You can do it in 2 sections.
We're anticipating that the first series, the first financing would be end of 2024, early 25, depending on where the projects were in the bid process. You don't want to get caught short. Right. So we would be more inclined to, because there is some cash that can cover some of the design, engineering, and bid work now. We'd want to know for that big project, let's make sure that there's no surprises. It doesn't come in 2x. And then we only borrowed enough to pay 1x, right? So we would usually get the bid before you all would award the bid. We'd be dialing in the actual cash flow and the financing.
So you actually go into the bond after bid, but before award, or it was based on? Okay.
Yeah, and I actually, just because I'm in particular the Paradise Pump Station, we already are at 90% design or beyond. And when we talk about this project last January, when we started the design effort, we were intending to be in construction within a few months and completed by the end of summer, heading into the next winter season. You may remember some of the deficiencies with the VFDs we're experiencing this winter. So we've had a number of close calls already. So if we can avoid that for next winter, that would be great. Obviously, we gotta let the process run its course and then see kind of where we end up on the timeline. But that certainly would reduce the risk to the district on our most important pump station.
So go ahead, next slide. You were asking about numbers and kind of the cash flow. So this is from the rate study. And so when that model, which again is extremely sophisticated, when it's looking at all of these assumptions on O&M costs, and you can see how those are rising over time, right? That's a function of a whole bunch of variables that get kind of rolled up. The financing you can see is the debt service line, right? So we're going to borrow 27 million over 2 series, and you can see that basically if you look out in the last year, the 5.1 million, right? That is when everything is starting. Oh, sorry, the 2.2 million. I was like, that seemed really high. The 2.2 million is the full amortization of both series of bonds that have now paid for all of the projects, right? So we're getting to the end. We showed you that roughly it's $1,000 an account, but it's covering all of the operating expenses plus $2.2 million in debt service.
And the reserves is just on the bonds, right? It's not, we already have 2.5 million in reserves by policy.
So, yeah, we've been using the 2.5 million emergency fund, and then separate, we want to have a capital reserve because of what I was talking about. When you award a project, you want to know that given a change in the market, you can still fund the remainder of the project.
Right, so that 2.5 million we have now will still stay there.
Yeah, and that's actually treated as part of this balance, right? The bottom line here, that's 7, right? This is the call all your different reserves, add it up, this is the number. And you can see it gets up early, right? It's 10 million, but then it drops and then it starts to rebuild to 5. And that was that graph that you saw, the bars that we just saw in the
But this allows us to actually be in construction on a $8.5 million pump station, Paradise Pump Station project, and design and bid, but not yet be complete with one of those other projects like a parallel force main or that nature.
It's a domino effect. You just keep rolling with the projects. Yeah. Because you know the money's coming in, or you have the money to do it, fund it.
All right, drum roll. We're gonna get to scenario 2. So if you want to pay cash,
140
this could be a really short conversation, right? But if you said we don't want to pay any interest, we just want to find a way to pay for it, you can see what happens, right? We need 140% rate increase just in year 1 to get us that big bucket to deal with what RJ was just talking about. Then we need another 50 to as we roll into the next phase of the projects. Then at 20, then we only need 5 at the end because we've kind of already done all the projects, right? So instead of 7.5, we only need 5 to keep up with our operations and all of the escalation on costs. So the big thing here is it goes from, we said 500 to, I think it was $1,004 or something. Now we're talking about 500 going to 2,300, almost 2,400. And again, this is just for illustrative purposes, but this is the magnitude of saying no debt, fine cash. And obviously from a equity perspective, anybody who's living in town for the next 3 years pays for it. Now, I will say, it's not like the rates go down. I mean, the actual payment goes down, right? Just because it goes from a 20% increase down to a 5%, it's still every year the fee, the sewer fee that's on the property tax bill is still going up. It's just not going to go up as quickly as originally anticipated. So this is, again, just to kind of give you the extremes between paying for a project out of rates and financing a project through the rates. Okay, next slide. So the problem with this, as you can see from the red arrow, is even with that massive rate increase, I mean, we picked a number to try to just get as close as what you would need. Theoretically, it still doesn't work because by the end of the fiscal year, next fiscal year, you're at 0. Nothing can happen that and this is everything. This is, you literally don't have a reserve anywhere. And you're going to 0, but that's okay, because then, it starts to build up over time as you get done with all the projects and you don't have real much capital to go out. So the rate consultant just gives them migraines, right? To think about this because their model is not set up to kind of have this extreme situation. They always want to maintain balances. And we could, instead of, whatever it was, the 150%, you could say 175, right? And that would raise this number up a little bit. And, and then you would potentially shave it off in a later year. But it is, we just tried to pick the minimum number that you would need to get you as close to 0 for illustrative purposes.
Well, plus we wouldn't be able to do these projects, right? Because we wouldn't have the money to do them.
Well, this assumes you would, but if an emergency happened, you have $0.
So I have a question, right? Is there a hybrid? Is there a hybrid where okay.
Exactly. I mean, you've got infinite number of scenarios.
Yeah.
Right, so it could be that we want to fund half the projects.
It's the 2025, right? We do the big pump station, and then can you basically have a higher rate, but then be all cash and a much smaller debt service across for more long-term to even the curve, right? And then therefore like be able to pick up and anticipate those future projects without drawing down on debt service, right? Would be the other alternative to see what the value in not servicing that debt would whether there would be a real payback.
We looked at some of that a little bit, and what you end up seeing is, so I mean, unless we did a rate decrease, which I don't know if that's ever been done, this now sets.
I'm in support of rate decreases, by the way.
That ends up, so that the year 5, unless you raise rates through a formal process, that becomes the new annual rate. So on scenario 1, it's $1,004 that would be carried forward unless the board did another rate study and did another rate increase or decrease. Otherwise, in this scenario, it's 22,000 something. The concern about doing a hybrid further is you're going to end up at a higher number in year 5, and that's what's going to carry forward.
But I agree with Charles. I'm not opposed to a rate decrease if we explain to the ratepayers that we need to raise rates for a defined period of time because we have a glut of projects coming down the pipeline that we need to do. And obviously we don't need a $2,300 rate year 5 going out, so we can bring it back down.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's what we should do, but I do agree that that's something we should consider.
So in the workshop, that's where he's getting about a policy decision and basically pushing it out 30 years and making everyone that's on the system pay for it evenly as they go, versus that one kind of front loads it. But part of it is, and I wrote this down, the ratepayers and the future would benefit. It's not all new, this system, right? So that equation and the paying upfront and then everybody else benefits downstream because we paid so much. If it's a brand new system, that's fine. If it's basically kit and parting in a hybrid, I don't buy that all completely as a narrative, right? And so it's not about the individual ratepayer either. It's about the system. And I think that in the end, the proper stewardship of the actual capital, however we do it, maximizing how much is going in and how much is going out and what our infrastructure is, it's really encapsulating the property values, the stability of the debt, and the overall expenditure of life and taking on of liabilities for all the properties in the town, irrespective of a timeline, right? And so that is the true policy in my mind. But it doesn't negate that one's super easy and looks clean and is easy to sell. The other one is you can't, it's not showing the metrics, but there is somewhere in between where you maybe could massage it, but make a better decision for the long term. So 5-10 years down the line, I mean, a rate decrease, isn't that really what we want our government to do and can't figure out how to do it? And I think it's because we go for those shiny, easy apples instead of trying to do the harder thing.
I think in our experience that, the next hard question for the board, not today, but even in 5 years or 3 years, when somebody comes back and says, we have this 5-year rate increase program that's already locked and loaded. We need to already be talking about the next 5, right? And we're talking about decreasing. You're going to have RJ standing up here, having done a CIP update, and all of those lower tier projects now are going to be red, right? So now instead of him saying, well, we need 25 million, we need 50 to 75 million just because those projects they're not programmed to all get done during this 5-year window. The study that was done on the entire system has said, well, these are not bad right now, but you need to be paying attention to them, right? So it's always you want to be prepared to be able to have capacity. Where we see a lot of utility districts get in trouble is they max out on just dealing with the red hot project that has to get done right now, and they just have no oxygen left in 3 years when the next one slams on, right? And that's, I think you're all thinking about this and systematically having the study done is giving you a pretty, I mean, you can look at the whole thing and say, oh my God, the number's huge. But the best part I heard was, yes, but some of this stuff we don't need to really, we don't have to find a way to build it now or pay for it now. So how do we tee everything up so that the next 5-year window is got capacity, right? We've got a rate that's already now settled. Maybe it is at 1,500 or something instead of 1,000. And that by itself has capacity to deal with the next phases of the capital plan.
It sounds like we couldn't guarantee there would be a decrease in 5 years from now, because it sounds like what you're saying is there could almost, the rates would have to stay the same depending on what happens. But there's no way at this point in time we could sit there saying, yeah, if we do a hybrid.
I mean, yeah, we're gonna tell you how
It'd be
fast we can do the projects.
Be up to the board that's sitting here in, 5, 6 years, but I did want to try and put at least my view on it, and obviously everyone has their different ways of looking at this. I'm not saying, just trying to put it in the perspective that I take. So current funding, we can do a lot of the projects we've been doing, a lot of the sewer rehab projects. So that's kind of that's going to be part of our annual program just about every year. When we look at one-time projects, it's that $27 million number for the ones that we talked about: Paradise Pump Station, Parallel Force Main, Corte Creek, meter vault, and the $5 million Riverwatch. That's the 27 million that we're trying to build and stretch out over a longer period. And so if I were to give an analogy, it'd be like, okay, you've got BART, and there's a cost to keeping BART operating, maintaining it, all those things. But if tomorrow they said, hey, we're going to extend BART to Sonoma and we're extending BART to Sacramento, and we want to pay for those extensions in 5 years through increasing fees to riders, would that be appropriate? That's kind of the way I would frame it.
And adding to that, I think some of the first year projects you're talking about they benefit the entire system, whereas those extensions of BART may not benefit all riders. But all the influence is really.
Yeah, to me, it's more like BART is really crowded on its existing system. We're going to do a redundant BART to all the same stations and double the capacity, right? And double the ability for it to function in its current footprint, right? It's really what we're talking about, but it is that it's feeding into that same system, but it is new infrastructure, right? Or redundant infrastructure, but, with actual benefit to the system. But yeah, so.
I want to go back to that scenario where the bondholders, where we would be obligated to raise rates because of an obligation. Can you explain that again?
Sure. So the analysis that's been done for this scenario one, that issue is covered for this first 5 years, right? We're talking about potentially going through a public hearing process to establish rates for a 5-year period of time that goes through 28, 29. Okay, so we know that barring some tsunami or something, right? Some act of God, that there should be no reason that you would not be able to cover debt service with these rate increases. But your covenant that you would pass as part of a resolution, if you were to issue bonds, will say that the district will go through a rate increase process, not every 5 years, but if it has to in year, let's say 7, because you elect after 5, we're doing pretty good, cash flow is working, we don't want to go through another 5-year, at least not yet. Well, you get to year 7 and perhaps there is an event that cash just isn't high enough. Then you will be obligated to kind of do what you're doing right now. Go through a public hearing process to raise rates. That's simply what it's saying. It's just, this is a covenant that you will have as long as the bonds are outstanding. We have had public agencies that for philosophical reasons, have said, yeah, I don't like being beholden to somebody who's gonna make me raise rates if we can't pay the debt service. But when you think about mathematically, well, it's an expense. I mean, you have to find a way to pay it. You could certainly cut back on CIP or whatever and make debt service happen first, and we've seen that. We've also seen districts just pay off the debt, right? I mean, if it's, let's just say you only borrow 10 million, and by 10 years down the road, you owe 7, and you have fund balance for good reasons. You just say, well, here, we don't want to be at all involved with these bondholders. We want to pay it off. Obviously, it's kind of like your pension obligation bond that you have. We're constantly looking at that and saying, well, what's your opportunity cost of your cash that you have versus your cost of it? If you're earning or able to deploy that cash into projects at 5 or 6%, but your cost of borrowing is at 2, why would you ever pay off the 2? Right? It's kind of like all of us with our mortgages that we got, 5 years ago, right? We're just not going to move because we want to keep that low interest.
But I do want to bring a little more. There's always the caveat of the covenant that Craig told us about, but really we've looked at the 10-year budget, and if inflation stays in a reasonable level and cost of construction stays a really reasonable level, in year 6 we might only increase a few percent. That's across the 10-year. It's not like we're setting them as we're not, everything's being set up to be nice and clean and smooth beyond that.
But
but we can't predict the future.
Right. I want to do one call for public comment also, because we've been, this is a great discussion, but I just want to make sure the public has a chance to join in as well. Lorena, can you just let us know if anybody puts their hand up on Zoom?
Yeah, at this time, we don't have any hands raised.
Okay, thanks.
Or email public comment.
Okay.
So Eli, this is just, for me, it's and it's a question. Let's say there's an earthquake and half our system breaks. And so all of a sudden we have a total drawdown and we don't have any more money. The covenant means you still have to pay back your bond owner at the end of the bond funding at the end of the year, right? There's no kind of clauses in there that protect us from acts of God and stuff like that, right? And so that's what we're beholden to. In an even world is just plain and easy going, right? Like it's a very easy debt structure. It's just legally the town or the sewer district, dependent on flows we couldn't even expect, right? Like would still need to be able to pay that.
Right. And that number was 2-something million, right? Based on the table you showed. And so, current revenue is right around 6.7 million, and with increases it could be higher. So 2 of your whatever 8 million or whatever it ends up being needs to be set aside for debt payment, but you still have plenty enough for operating and for repairs and emergency projects.
Yeah, in normal operation.
So I'm gonna two comments to your point. So, and I'm gonna play lawyer, which is really dangerous. The first one is the covenant is that you will go through the 218 process for a rate increase. There is no guarantee that the community doesn't come out and protest. It's a simple majority protest, right? That will prevent rates from being implemented. History has it, as we know 218 right now, assuming it doesn't get changed in November with some of the initiatives. But right now, it's for the last 20 years, most agencies go through a rate increase process. There are those who protest or complain or send you their letter saying, I don't like what you're what you want to raise. But it isn't the majority plus one that protests, so the rates become effective. If in your case we had an earthquake and everybody's in dire straits and you have to raise rates 10%, and absolutely the community came out and protested, those rates don't become effective. There's nothing you can do. You just as a board have an obligation to work through the process. And the bondholders know that California, that you can't just by doctrine, just throw down new rates without any process. So that's the one technicality that could, in theory, prevent those new rates.
So then I have a question. So does that mean when we start the rate discussion, there's like, by the way, we already owe 10%, so let's start at 10% and go from there if there's a discussion about it, like in the meeting minute or the general proposal and presentations. And Amy, let's.
I'm just gonna ask, whether it would be helpful for me to give just a brief summary of the actual process for raising rates.
Yes,
under
please.
Prop 218 and Prop 26. So there is, you know, these voter initiatives have put pretty stringent requirements on the ability of local agencies to adopt or increase what they call property related fees, which these are. So there's a couple, so basic process is we have to provide notice to all of the owners of record, which is a term of art, which is generally the owner of the property as on the assessment rolls and anyone else we're aware of that may own property or have an interest. We have to give at least 45 days notice. Then we hold a public hearing. We have to give notice of the fee increase, the analysis of how we came to the fee increase. Then we hold this public hearing and we take protests from anyone who objects. And at the hearing, we count up the protests. And if a majority of the owners of parcels object, and they filed written protests, then the board cannot raise the fee. So I think Craig's saying it's like bondholders get it, that it's not completely in the board's control, but you have this obligation to go through the public hearing process to raise rates. And I also want to say, you know, calculating, there are safeguards on how you calculate the fee. I should also say that the board is required to adopt the fee by 2/3 vote. So there is a supermajority requirement before you can do it. There also are particular factors in the fee calculation. We can't make a profit. We can only do a fee that covers the costs. And that's why we do these very intensive fee analysis before we would go and increase fees. We are restricted on the use of the fees can only be used for these purposes. And then there is a kind of what we call the nexus requirement, that the fee you impose on an individual can't exceed the proportional cost to that ratepayer. In other words, you couldn't decide to say, oh, we're going to waive the fees for this neighborhood and we're just going to put it on them. So there's also the protection for the individual ratepayer to make sure that the ratepayer is not paying more than their fair share. So there is a little rigmarole, and but these are a lot of protections for our ratepayers. So, you know, if we go down this lane, you're going to be seeing that we'll be holding the public hearing and there'll be certain processes that will follow.
I'd like to jump in. This is obviously the beginning of a multi-meeting discussion here, and I wanted to just check in. I know we said we'd wrap at 8:30. I want to check in on where we're at in terms of the presentation, and also in terms of like any discussion points that you wanted to make sure that we start to flesh out tonight.
Thank you. So we do have 2 small sections to cover, and there'll be opportunity for public comment on each of those small segments. And at the end, we are going to come back to the board for final possible direction at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll move on.
It.
Yeah,
For me.
that's until the end.
Okay.
We'll go back up here at the end. So you can advance the slide, please. Right. All right, so we'll just cover that. Okay, so other considerations. I touched on it earlier. You know, as we look at it through the modeling process, the sewer grant program, you know, it's a big investment. And so this is a chance as we look at, even though we're not going to use it to set rates, it's just when we look at the CIP, $1.1 million per year based on that current grant value. If there was a desire to really sharpen the pencil and really, really be as prudent as possible, there is potential to reduce that by $500 and save about $200,000 a year.
That program can be changed at any time, right? It's not like a fee type
But
thing.
it's a pilot program,
Okay.
and so it actually, I believe it's gonna sunset on June 30th unless we up it again.
Okay, what I'm saying though, theoretically, we could decide to re-up it, but 3 years from now, we could decide, hey, we want to do away with it. And it's just a normal meeting type thing.
Well, it would
notice
expire
process.
based on,
Okay.
the date that's on the original resolution. So it will sunset unless we bring it back by the end of the fiscal year. So that's one thing that we want to include in just kind of overall direction. We talk about the 10-year CIP. And then next slide, please. This one is a little more interesting. So this is something that really we've seen happen in one of our neighboring districts, where when they look at their ratepayers and we talk about equity, many of the ratepayers were annexed into our district after Prop 13, and therefore their portion of property tax. So the district makes money a couple ways, but the primary ones are percentage of property tax that goes to special districts and our annual charge. So for many of our ratepayers, and we're still fine-tuning the numbers and working with the counties and others to confirm everything, there's about 850 or so people in our district that only pay annual charge but do not pay property tax toward the district. And around, based on $500 and 6,000 laterals, $3 million is annual charge. And we get about, I want to say 2.6 or so million in property tax a year. So not quite the same amount, but it's a big contributor. So as a district, let's consider equity. Do we want to continue at the structure we've gone, where everyone, regardless of that kind of property tax standpoint, gets the same rate? Or do we want to have two separate rates, one for those that contribute property tax toward the district and those that don't? And so with that, do another opportunity for public comment question or board comment as well.
Is there a way to just get the property tax from the parcels that are in our service area but not paying? Why is that?
We did some research, so we didn't have it yet tracked on every agreement for all of the parcels that are annexed, but the ones that we found, the county actually is holding on to that additional money. They have an opportunity to pass it on or not, and they have. So the challenge there is the property owners are still paying their 1%, but it's going to the county instead of the sanitary district.
Is that money just going in the county's general fund? Okay.
Do we know what the other districts are generally doing? I mean, are most of them passing on or taking this additional rate from those who are not paying into property taxes?
So Ross Valley has done it now for a few years, maybe even 5 years. They're the ones that we know most, and then otherwise I don't know if our Raptellus might be able to comment on that. I don't know, Jordan, if you have experience from other districts, and otherwise maybe Craig, but it's.
In the meantime, I have another question too. So on that question of the sewer lateral rebates that we give, is that based on application? I mean, people have to come to you and request it. It's not an automatic, because some people are more sensitive to financial things than others, and some people might not even know. So can we make it on demand or on application only and not an automatic thing?
Yeah, it is application only except for one scenario, and that's when we do a project. That's when we do the lower lateral, which is, the portion of the roadway, because we're there, and because we don't want every homeowner coming in after and digging up right where we already dug up and paved and all those things.
So the homeowners there are already paying share for the lower laterals?
Instead of getting a match that ends up being up to 2,500, they will get the lower lateral, which is the portion from the main to basically the back of curb or sidewalk.
Without fee?
Yeah, that gets absorbed by the district as part of the program and the project. And then they still are triggered and required to take it the rest of the way at 100% of their fee. Unless they are eligible for some low income programs.
And that's the same as other districts, other sewer districts in Marin in general?
It's
the way they're doing it? Okay. Okay.
To your point, RJ, I don't know if you can hear me, but you asked if other districts, sanitation districts, were incorporating that same, like a separate cost for non-property tax paying customers. And you guys are actually my first client in California. All my other ones are in Colorado and Arizona, but it looks like from the last analysis you had us do, Ross Valley Sanitation District has a separate sanitation rates for a Larkspur zone and then a Ross Valley, those customers that fall within Ross Valley. And that's going back from, looks like the earliest is 2018, then increasing their rates from there. And the Larkspur zone sewer rates are significantly higher than those that fall within Ross Valley Sanitation District.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, just to share my thoughts on that question, I would definitely be open to pursuing a different fee tier for people who are in our service district but don't pay property taxes to us. But before doing that, I would want to approach the county first and just see if there's even a discussion to be had about getting them to remit that portion of the property tax to us. I understand that they are not likely going to be very eager to part with that money, but it does feel like the right thing to do. It feels like the right thing to do from the county, like that, the property tax should ultimately flow to the agencies that it's intended for. And it also, I think, is the right thing to do for ratepayers before we proceed with creating a second higher tier, just to make sure that we really are turning over those stones and that we're making a good faith effort to try and recoup the money from the county before resorting to raising rates.
Can I give a counter to that though?
Sure.
My only fear, and ultimately if we're beholden to the general fund of the county, is that then our system, our sewer district, and the monies that come in from that transfer, right, is dictated on how they're balancing their budgets.
Yeah, right? I think it would depend on if you could make a binding deal with them.
So if we get it before it's distributed to the county, it comes to us, so we can do that.
I mean, you pay your property tax to the county and then they divvy it up.
They do. Yeah. Right. So then it wouldn't be an actual from the county like general fund. It would be the tax. It would have to be an agreement that they just give a percentage of that tax for these certain parcels to the sanitary district instead of to the county.
Yeah, and we're not sure that it's 100% of what should be due to the district is actually being held by the county. It may be going into their collective pool that's going to the cemetery district, the school district, the community college. There's, when you think about the 1%, it gets divided up into, 8 different agencies, depending on which tax rate area it is. And it may be just your little piece that isn't getting ID'd for you. It's just getting kind of blended and redistributed to the other.
There's a special amount dedicated for special districts. And that includes not just sanitary districts, but the other special districts. How it's broken out from there, we don't have all the details.
Okay, yeah.
But going back to one of the agreements that we did find from 1997 tied to the Larkspur annexation, they did say that no loss of revenue by doing this. And also we want to make this our policy moving forward. So they would have to undo that policy.
Do you know how much money we're talking about? Yeah. Plus or minus?
Just round numbers. Right. So I think we're talking about roughly 860 out of 6,000 units. And for the other balance, the 5,200 generate 2.6 million.
So,
So 1/7.
yeah, it's 1/7, it's about 400,000.
I guess 1/7.
Because I did 2.7 million, which is what you said our total. 1 out of 7 of that, it's about 400,000 a year you'd be gaining.
Is it possible for us just to match whatever, I mean, we have a lot of larkspur in our district up on that, on the west side, I guess. Shouldn't we make it so that all of Larkspur pays the same? So we can look at the Ross Valley rates of what they're charging the Larkspur residents, so that it would make sense that Larkspur residents would pay what Larkspur residents pay, and then maybe the same thing with Tiburon, is that? Because I'm sure they are quite a bit higher than
I think
us.
it's, the rates have to be tied to our
Our
metrics.
rate analysis.
Okay, so we can't do anything.
Yeah, we can't just do arbitrary.
Darn, I really wanted to.
You got some enemies over there?
No.
So we will, I mean, any other comments, but we also will come back at the end where you can all comment on anything
Yes,
discussed
great,
today.
great.
So, the next item, I think, Eli would like to recuse himself.
Yeah, so the ADU portion of the
This is
discussion.
tied to,
Use.
the Marin civil grand jury comment about ADUs.
Thank you. Let me know.
So we just have one slide on this one. So you may recall, we're in civil grand jury, had a release about, ADUs and, the prescription to increase Marin's housing supply is, a lot of ways it was to reduce permit fees across various jurisdictions. So we were asked as a sanitary district, would we consider waiving fees for ADUs and JADUs? And so we've done some, really simple analysis. These are the numbers we've had over the last couple of years. 17 ADUs or JADUs in 2022, 6 in 2023, and SC2 only charges $500 for a permit fee. So do we, and this isn't tied to our annual rate, but would we want to waive those fees knowing that it's, I don't know if this turns into $10,000 a year.
11,500 was like those last 2 years.
So
Do you know, I'm sorry, do you know other districts are doing? Are they waiting?
most are just saying no. We're
Just
not,
waive them?
they're saying no. They're saying we're not gonna.
They're not waiving them?
Nevada Sanitary is full rate, is what
Okay.
you were pulling at.
It is $500. Is that what others are charging? Or they're charging more?
More. So again, when we charge, we have pass through. We have the biggest is the connection fee from CMSA. So that's not here because we don't actually get any of that. So that is their decision to make. That's their board's authority. We were just talking about our slice, which is the $500 per ADU or JADU.
I should probably know this already, but I don't. When an ADU is put in place, is there a separate sewer fee? So does that double the property sewer fee to have the ADU? Like the $492 they're paying now, does that set in place a separate annual payment for the ADU as well?
Usually not.
Usually not, okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to, definitely if it connects through the home and through the same connection to the main, there is no annual fee.
Okay.
And actually, I don't think, even if it connected individually, you would have a connection charge of $2,500 from CMSA in addition to a $500 sewer permit. But
not a new annual fee for, is that something we have any control over to charge?
We can, it would be changing our ordinance on how we charge different rates to different types of residential properties.
Mhm.
Right now, we charge each resident one.
Right.
But because of the property tax component, there is some balance. So the person who has the mega mansion is paying a higher percentage property tax for the district.
Right.
But it's
As long
only
as
paying
they bought it recently.
the standard
Mhm.
annual charge. So there is some compensating.
Okay. And we're trying to encourage ADUs now because it helps with our housing elements, is that correct? We're trying to.
Really, this is just presenting a neutral, I'm presenting neutrally what the Corinth Civil Grand Jury wanted us to review. And so many of the districts said, we're not even gonna look at feasibility, and then we said, you know, we'll at least look at it. It doesn't look that complicated. So
And the
this is
purpose
us.
of the civil grand jury was to encourage housing, encourage development of ADUs. That's why they're recommending it. Okay. Okay, good.
I don't think $500 is gonna stop anybody from building an ADU. And I also think that allowing extra, capacity or flow from through the same pipes, because you're not charging them for the additional house. You know, if it's going through the home, there's no additional charge for their connection to.
Just so their assessment would increase based on the value of that new structure. And that would be in reality where they contribute to the district.
But
there's no extra sewer fee. Or like if it was $492, they're paying $492, even if with the ADU. Yeah, well, I think $500 is fair.
When we assign a fee, you said it was per single family lot, not house, but lot. Is it a single family lot? So then parcel. So an ADU is not a but SB 9. Yeah, then it would change it, right? But an ADU is just a lot, right? And also I've seen this in other districts where they try to mandate 2 connections, a new connection for even though it could be tied into the main house. And the state cares about that and does not, you cannot mandate that.
Yeah.
So there's, you know, and then you're creating a disparity between different people that may or may not be able to do that on their lot.
Yeah, they had the initial Senate bill, and then in a year or 2 later, they clarified specifically to some of those points.
And when you submit for an ADU, do you have to show that your sewer lateral is clear with the same testing that you do when you have?
Yeah, you would be triggered to test your lateral, and you'd be triggered to submit an application for whatever your anything connected to the district we need to know about, we need to inspect.
How do you feel, staff, about that fee? Do you think if you manage the budgets, right, is that important? Or ultimately, if the town had a policy of, we love ADUs, those are the type of housing that we want to meet our RENA numbers to, and we buy into that policy that's being asked of us, is it easy for you to absorb, or do you think that ultimately that's an ask that isn't fair to your employees, to the district? And
I mean, really, in this situation, you know, compartmentalizing like the role as district manager for the sanitary district, and I mean, there's a cost to processing permits, inspecting permits, and I don't know, I'm not.
So you're not profit. It's only about compensating the employees for actually hooking up this thing that is a new, like understanding what it is. And that's a fair fee.
Application review. There's an engineer reviews what they're proposing. There might be a couple back and forth, approves it. Then there's an inspector that goes out and physically tests and inspects it.
Okay.
So you would be saying we're going to do that for free and have those funds come from the district's budget somehow.
Does the 500 cover those costs?
Barely, yeah.
So it sounds like you would prefer they stay in place. Is there?
I just think. Well, I guess if we're going back to the, I think the Marin Civil Grand Jury was trying to say there's a big thing here, and I think for the sanitary district, it's not a big thing.
Because the cost of putting in an ADU
is $500. It's the reality is, and our response to their question was all costs are factors for anyone who wants to build an ADU.
Well, and this, I mean, from a policy standpoint, right, my understanding about what Corte Madera has been able to do with ADUs is we're one of the most productive per capita ADU builders in the state already. So to incentivize it more, or say that ultimately, you know, we're the ones that should buy in when maybe the more expensive fees that weren't even willing to basically go down might not be building as many ADUs. What was the grand jury? Because that's 22 municipalities in the RIN. it doesn't apply evenly across the board, right,
flip-
on that one.
The flip side of that is though, if I'm gonna build an ADU, is $500 that big of a deal?
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
probably gonna move forward and build it anyway. I'm not gonna build an ADU because I don't want to pay $500.
And the biggest misconception that we get is they associate $3,000 worth of fees that we assess as SD2. In reality, it's the capacity charged from CMSA that we are enforcing.
So if their recommendation though is that we waive or significantly lower fees for under 750 feet. Can we sort of turn that on its head a little bit and say, okay, if it's over 750 feet or over 1,000 feet or whatever we want to put it at, that it's going to be more than that?
You can do whatever we want.
So I think,
right. So I think this 750 is the JAUs, which is a smaller fraction of these other numbers. So you can do whatever you want. And it's just, we're just trying to follow the.
Is there even a permit fee for a JADU? Because aren't those usually internal to an already existing building?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
But isn't there still a permit?
You did, yeah, there's still.
So I guess if you turned a garage into a living space with a bathroom.
Got it.
So I think we would like your recommendation on that, staff. What do you want us to do? Because I think it sounds like we're open to not honoring the civil grand jury's request because we don't see that it's a significant motivator one way or the other.
We already responded to that, right? And did we?
But we had to follow up. So I think, in reality, I think we'd like to not have this carried forward into the rest of the rate study.
Mhm.
And so whether we feel confident enough to pick a direction one way or another now, or whether we just say, we've analyzed it and we're going to give it time and we're going to monitor, that's fine too.
So I think that's good.
I think I'd rather have them come back with some kind of proposal back to us. I think we need to give direction to staff because Eli's not here, so we won't be able to pick up this when we go to general discussion. I'd rather see you come back with a proposal to implement that fee and see what it looks like.
Well, it's already implemented. So it's just whether we want to take it away.
Eliminate.
Oh, not to waive it, no.
No, we don't want to waive it
I
either.
don't want to waive it. So we're not interested in discussing it further.
Are you there?
Waving.
Yeah, I think, I don't think anyone has spoken in favor of waiving the fee.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
we're even
necessary.
significantly reducing it?
No, I think it sounds like it doesn't really even cut very
If
well.
that
And double
becomes an
it
issue in the
for
future, we
just-
can always have another discussion.
And is this just Corte Madera properties? Because we don't do permitting for the Larkspur properties, right?
If anything connecting to the sewer district, including those other jurisdictions, they need a permit.
And we can't charge more to people in Larkspur.
I'm gonna ask that on there.
So let's, next slide. So this is really a time for just overall wrap up. If there was, based on everything, give Eli a second.
Just a quick question when you come in. Are there any other revenue streams out there potential or you hit everything pretty much just out of curiosity?
I'm not aware of districts successfully tapping into FEMA money, but there's a slight potential and we'll kind of pursue that, where appropriate.
Awesome. I'm back. Just want to state for the record that I recused myself because I have a conflict of interest because my business is selling ADUs, so I do not influence town ADU policy.
So I have a couple questions if I could just.
And just
So
we're in the recap on anything we talked about today aside from the last topic.
So short term, the real estate industry says interest rates are coming down. They're going to keep coming down in time for the presidential election. Are you looking at timing in terms of maybe waiting a little while on the bonds, or is it time to do it now? Or I see lots of.
It's still on the ADU question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I was trying to get them to move the slide down.
Okay.
So aside from getting direction, tentatively, we would come back as early as March 5th with something formal. But want to hear from you on a lot of what we covered, and if you need a reminder, it's on the agenda.
Right.
And I think to answer part of your question, and maybe Craig can answer, I think that was definitely a question I had. And so one of the things we looked at was the 2-step bonding for that reason.
Okay.
But also what Craig told me was you can always refinance the bond. Then
Okay, so if the rates go down, we can refinance. Okay.
Yeah,
But
I think we've had a number of discussions with some bank economists, and who knows what November's gonna look like. But while the general trend, although last week would indicate differently, should be that the rates are starting to come down. They're expecting a lot of volatility around the election cycle. So if you were really trying to time things in a perfect world, you'd probably be borrowing in no later than September. I think we can talk about process and what would be asked of the board, but if you were to go through the public hearing and the implementation of any new rates, the idea would be that would be effective for the next tax cycle, right? Which is the property tax cycle. So that would work. I think from our perspective, it's much more important to have a good handle on the project costs and the cash flow than it is to try to second guess the timing of an interest rate. We could do the analysis on what happens if the market moves 0.25%. What does that affect on your debt service? But it will pale in comparison to numbers moving $1 million on a project, because you can bid this package versus that package. So
does our finance committee have the ability to review this as a sanitary district? Is that only a town kind of review, or just as another experienced group that could give feedback to the council for better surety?
I think you would need to create that authority by resolution. I don't think
I'd have to look at the resolution, but I think it applies to both town and the board.
I haven't actually seen the
I don't think so,
resolution,
because it's
but
never gone there before.
No, I understand.
I think we can probably figure out a way to make that happen.
I like that idea.
Thank you. I have just 2 more quick questions.
Can I just, on that idea, I just want to get clarity. You're talking about specifically a potential bond.
If we go bonding and talk about all these different, or just because it sounds like in the end, part of my understanding with the rate study is there's a CPI, there's these needs, and that is fixed, and it's a very kind of formulaic approach to basically setting the rates, right? So that I don't believe that the finance committee could dig into that, right? But it is like, ultimately, if we're looking for structures of how to pay for it and aligning that with basically, like a 5-year CPI.
One of the challenges is going to be process and where you fit that in on this timeline. The rates will need to be set in order to actually be effective by the.
So to have them effective by July 1st, we're on a fast track.
Yeah, council needs to adopt them by July 1st so it can get to the county so that they can be put on the annual property tax bill.
But I think what Charles is talking about, because I think we did this with the pension obligation bonds, I think the POBs got reviewed by the finance committee. So it's almost, I'm making it simple. You come to a presentation, the finance committee along, on the.
Right, like with the two, like looking at what are those two kind of ask in the.
Well, all I'm saying is it ties directly to the rates. So it's not, you could force, as far as I understand, the other conversation.
Right, well, so part of it is as a council, we're being asked to look at that 27 million and say, we're gonna base our rates or any kind of financial study on doing a full funded CPI at 27 million. Right? Is that what
currently we have it more split up to 13, 12, was it 15 and 12?
Yeah.
15 and 12, based on our needs. The next step is, once we have more clarity, we're going to formalize a report. And by all means, that can be reviewed by the public and or the financial
Well, but
committee.
at that point, the report is saying what the decision was, and I think that this is it sounds like this is in between now and when you finalize that report, feedback about how to structure that in a finer detail than maybe any of us are able to talk about, but the finance people are financiers and basically have brilliant minds. And I remember the process and their kind of advisement that they gave based on the pension obligation bonds, and it brought a lot more confidence. Maybe I could understand it on my own, but we have these groups to help get the best outcomes for our town, and then we can stand behind those advisory boards. So I'm just asking, could we do that for all of us to make sure that it's structured? It's not it's just a secondary kind of check that isn't the consultant or staff, but isn't the council, which is a policy setting, but isn't always just a review for an expert group, right? Like, so that's.
Well, I'm just kind of following up just to make sure I understand. So you'd like this presentation to go to the finance committee or
a finance focused one, right? Because I don't think we got into the I started to get into the nitty gritty, and it was like. And
are you asking them to make a recommendation about whether to
see, that's
finance or not?
Yeah, well, so that was those were two decisions that we were asked. And then even within that, staff is coming to us saying, we've already figured this out. This is what our advisor is saying, right? Like, we're going to be asked to basically accept that and move forward with it as presented, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do we all feel confident, because we're not on the finance board, we're elected officials to set policy. I personally feel comfortable letting people that sell bonds for a living that are on the finance committee look at what the bond recommendations are and help give better sage advice about the town as a town's flow, if it's capable, I feel more confident in that. Yeah.
You guys have the authority to do whatever you feel is right. I will remind you that actually we had Raftellus do their model and look at bonds, and then they did a peer review, and that's what we're presenting today. So we have had two financial entities working on this rate study as we speak.
And they recommend the rate and the way that it would divvy out and payment structures, right?
Yeah, if I can, I think what would be helpful, because I think your point is well taken, but from the policy decision is what we're, I think, wanted to hear tonight about stretching that, and it was more the equity question and the social equity, and the bond structure will stretch this out over time. If that policy decision like that looks like the way to go, we hear that from the board, we can take then the specifics regarding how the issuance of the bond, the two-phased approach,
or how much is bonded, how much is paid for.
Maybe it's not fully 20,
Well, so I guess
I didn't really see that as a policy. The other one was we can't actually do it based on our wanting to keep, our $2.5 million in the bank, right? So the full just cash funding wasn't really.
Well, it could be. It just would be an even higher rate than what was represented, right? Because we.
All right. So
sorry, I think what would be helpful direction is based on what we've identified as $27 million in unique funds. Should we look at the best bonding situation to cover all 27 million, or are we looking at financing a portion of that through bonds instead and doing pay as you go to hybrid this? That is kind of where we need to land.
So happy to share my thoughts on that. I would like to see at least one or two hybrid options presented. I think we've got the bookends here. We had all bond and all cash. That's helpful, gives us a sense of what the bounds are. That's a lot of debt, or on the other end, those are very high rates. And so I'd like to see a couple hybrid options for us to look at and take into account. I think it does come down to a question of, given the needs that we have, what feels like what type of rate increase are we comfortable with? I think I'd like to keep us below the county average. For the all bond projection that we saw put us at about 1,000. That's still quite low, which is great. I wonder if maybe we could go to something in the 1,200 ballpark, and I'm curious where that would bring, how much we'd have to bond for then, so these are things that I want to see. But I'd like to see a hybrid option going forward. But I think the numbers do suggest ultimately that there is going to have to be a bond. The only other note I wanted to make was just in terms of how we approach this, the concept of generational equity as it was outlined. I agree with what Charles said earlier. I don't like the way it was framed there. I think that's a mindset that pits residents against each other. And I think when we're starting to say, I don't want to pay for this now because people are going to be benefiting in the future from what I've just paid to improve. Like, I hear that type of thing when I hear people in the flood zone say they don't want to pay for fire safety projects, or people in the fire zone say they don't want to pay for flood control. It's like, no, we can't be doing this. We're all part of the town, regardless of where you live or when you live here. I think we all just need to pitch in, and not. I don't think we should be thinking about this as a zero-sum game. We shouldn't be thinking about infrastructure from a standpoint of like, is somebody benefiting from it more than I did? So that's my take on that. But other than that, I think, seems clear we need a bond. Thank you for the informative presentation. And I'd just like to see a little bit more in terms of what some of the other more nuanced options might look like.
That's a good direction on that one. The other two that I think we need a little more direction on is, we had our recommended CIP, which was included the redundant force main to the south side of the creek. So I want to hear about that versus any other scenario, including the one that goes all the way to the other creek. And the other one is, I don't know if we got clear direction on non-property tax contributors, and whether we want to look at two fees.
Sure, I'll just weigh on the other two and then I'll pass it to everyone else. Up here, I think on the CIP, I'd like to stick with, if we can, stopping south of the creek for now. It sounded like you guys are confident that the portion that runs under the creek is probably good to go for the time being, and we'll just keep an eye on it. So that would be my preferred alternative there. I appreciate you explaining more of the background of like redundant force mains. I'm more comfortable with that now, so thank you. And then with regards to the property tax situation, I think just what I said earlier, I'm open to opening up a new rate tier for people who aren't paying property tax like everyone else is, because I don't think that's particularly fair. But I do want to chase that line of inquiry down with the county first and see if there's at least a discussion to be had about figuring out where that revenue is going right now, and if there's any willingness on their part to have it redirected to SD2.
I'm in alignment with the mayor, so.
I am too.
Yeah, okay, I'm okay with it also. One thing I like to do is when you come back with any hybrids, if you can make sure you lay out what potential risks are if we go that direction.
It's great. And I think that hybrid conversation, it seems like a good one, if we can take that to the finance committee.
Right, because that's where it would be, I think, really helpful to get their expertise on like, what's that blend of bond versus rate?
As a resident advisory, and because they'll have some personal ownership in it too. So.
Right.
Is that something that should go to them before it comes to us?
The recommendations.
Should the hybrid, that discussion with finance committee, hybrid?
Do we want them to come with those proposals
Do we want
first?
them
Like, with
to be discussing the finance committee first,
Yeah.
and then come to, and then whatever recommendation.
Yeah, if they have a recommendation, I think
If that makes sense.
I agree.
Yeah. So you want them to make the recommendation, come back to you?
Yeah, is that clear? Like, if we could.
I'm just
So-
trying to figure out the number of meetings, because
Sure.
then you would have to pick that, and then we do the rate analysis.
Oh, yeah. So
So, I mean, we'll just have to look at the dates and make it work.
So when we come for an official hearing, we need to have all of the stats based on one scenario. And it needs to be distributed to every property owner, like 2 weeks in advance.
But you're not gonna be able to come back with, unless we just said, hey, do the straight bonding right now, which I don't know that we were gonna accept that as the next meeting anyway, right? So.
Yeah, we'll just have to figure out how to build it in.
Is it
What's-
maybe
45
possible?
day notice to.
Yeah.
They
Maybe
come-
it's a joint meeting where for the meeting where you do the presentation, the next presentation, we bring some of the financial guys in to hear it and comment.
We can do that.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Maybe not a separate whole meeting.
What's our final deadline on this? Just trying to get something approved by the first March
We
meeting.
need to give notice to the county in May But we also want to know that our 45-day protest period has been completed by May.
So that you would call for a public hearing.
Yeah.
And that public hearing cannot happen
45.
any sooner than
Right.
45 days.
Why does the county need to know by May? What
To
was
get
it?
it, well, May or June to get it on the next year's property tax bill,
Okay, got it.
which would be effective.
Yeah, I think June.
Okay.
Final, yeah,
So
that's.
it might be June.
All right, well, yeah, let's look at the dates, but I think it's important to do this right rather than do it fast. So, yeah.
We'll figure it out.
But if we're raising the rate, then we have to do it fast.
Mr. Bundy.
Oh, thanks, Bob Bundy,
Dr. Bundy.
Golden Hand Passage, having been on the flood board for a number of years, I'm familiar with our aging infrastructure and what needs to be done on that, so it's very easy to extrapolate to what RJ is saying about what our sanitary district infrastructure is like. I would, I think, favor the bond issue going forward, and I think it's important to act on this. I've been here and heard the stories about Ross Valley Sanitary District, the spills, the fines, some of these smaller Southern Marin sanitary districts with their, their own facilities, spills, fines from that. The San Francisco Bay has been cleaned up, over the last number of decades, and, Corte Madera doesn't want to be responsible for having a spill and a fine and polluting the bay. So support this.
So, Bob, because we're talking, it's a workshop, right? So, do you feel just going straight with the bond, or did you think that exploring the hybrid is worth the extra step, or would you say, maybe we should just go with the bond? And
I like the bond. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I like the bond also. It's just, I think we should be reviewing all
Right,
options.
exactly. I don't feel comfortable
Instead of just
approving.
going one way.
Yeah.
And it can't hurt to have hybrids.
So I guess my question then is like, you said, like, there's many hybrids, but did you actually explore a few, right? Like, did you, and you rejected bringing those forward because you didn't see any kind of synergy?
Yeah, we had a working model in a detailed model in the spreadsheet. And we said, hey, what if we put 27 million in year one? What happens if we do 15 and 12 and do 12 in year three? What happens? And you could see your fund balance move, on those lines. And then you would also see the rates at the same time move around. It would, we looked at all that and tried to make it what we thought was smooth as possible. But sure, I mean, could you do a little tweak here or there and potentially, someone's going to prefer,
right? I can just tell you
1,100 or 1,200 in 5 years versus 1,000. So it's,
I was conflicted because it's like Todd used to come to us and be like, oh, this financial wizard on our finance committee basically saw it in a way that maybe nobody else saw, and basically gave a proposal that was a little more sophisticated and so that stuck with me. And it's like, it's not saying that that's wrong or anything. It's like, is there more money or some way we can do it that could be more beneficial for the tax ratepayers?
Sorry, but I think if we go to finance committee, it would be helpful to know. The only reason I think that what would change would be if the rest of the board also feels that $1,200 is a different final rate at the end of those 5 years is appropriate. Then we could actually, I think, have some more play, and that changes a little bit of the calculus.
Similar trajectory, but at the end be closer to 1,200 and reduce the bond until you get there. That would be
but let's also be clear, 1,200 is the bar now, not at the end of the 5-year cycle. So what would be interesting and what we didn't see is, what are their rates at the end of their 5-year? Are they already fixed there? Right? Because they could be even higher than that.
They will be.
Right. So it could be a 15. So really it's what is at the end of the 5 years, set that bar of, we're at 12 day one and 15 at the end, because that's the average. Now what can you do? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one thing I want to throw into the soup is, when we talk about fairness or we talk about equity, it looks like there's the thought of it going forward. But I'm thinking about when you go backwards, there are many of us who have benefited from this low rate for a very long time. And so we have to think, I think, in a sense of how do we make it fair in that sense? Because so maybe, you know, there's some way to do that even in a non-hybrid model. I'm not sure, but I think that's one way to think about it too, because I lie awake sometimes thinking the young people are going to come and put a pillow over my head because we older people have benefited so much from a strong economy, low interest rates, low prices in houses. And, you know, we can't load much more onto them. I don't know how they're going to make it. So if we can do something to think about how, you know, we need to give something forward to those people. That's another way to look at it. I also had a question. What would be would there be an advantage to taking the going to the other side of the creek? That second scenario, is there I understand it will cost more, but I'm just wondering, is there a benefit to it that we might want to be considering?
I mean, right, so the scenario is your main artery goes down. You know, it's unsure if it fails, what do you do? So
Earthquake, like you said.
So if the section that breaks under the creek and we didn't pay for that portion, within a reasonable amount of time, we would hopefully be able to, we'd have a connection point and we could do a temporary system, at least to handle a lot of the flow. And that would minimize the damage. If we did nothing, we're bleeding until the complete repair is done. But given, like I said, that was installed in the late 80s with thick wall. We actually have a little piece of it. It's very thick walled HDPE, and it was fused. There's no metallic corrosive valves under the creek. It's just plastic.
Is it under the mud or is it actually
under the mud?
Yeah. So
we think it's reasonable to not include that. The one other thing I guess I want to make sure I should mention is when we talk about the Larkspur, or not the non-property tax contributors, and someone did a quick math and it was what now the year that's spread out between 800 users, and by the time you work that through the model, it ends up being a larger number than the base ratepayer, you know, a little over 2x. So even though the base ratepayer might be comfortable at 1,200 on year 5, we also have to remember if we go that route, that's
500 more.
That's and we think it's probably gonna be a little more than that. So then your non-property tax contributors, if we go equitable across a district, they're going to be in the 2000s. So just something to consider because they're obviously part of the district.
So I have one question on the equity thing. I'm sorry, did you want to?
Go ahead.
No, you're more. You have
Okay,
more
go ahead.
So on the equity issue, I'm just wondering, is there anything available for a senior on fixed income with regard to sewer rates? Is there anything that can be available if somebody really is crying?
So we have grant programs for laterals, and then otherwise
nothing for sewer.
The other one.
Okay, I just wanted to check and make sure that wasn't really the case.
Yeah, there isn't a senior exemption
or even a low income.
Well, not just that, legally.
But also legally that you can't charge. I mean, it's sort of backwards, but you can't overcharge other people to
compensate
for someone. That being said, you know, there are some private foundations and private donations that probably people could apply for.
Okay, well, that's good to know in case anybody really starts crying already on this one.
Hey, RJ, the presentation will be posted online for people to see.
So I'd like to ask, this has been a good kind of bringing it all back in, and as I started the conversation a couple hours ago, that, you know, there's infinite number of scenarios here. And we just intentionally showed you the extremes, right? So you kind of know your universe that you're working with. So with that data, if we think about the model and the hybrid version, can we get a thumbs up, thumbs down, straw vote on what in an ideal world you'd like to see? So right now we're assuming $500 is kind of the current rate, right? Mm-hmm. So what would we feel comfortable with next year's rate starting at? Like, is it going from 500 to 750? Is it 500 to 600? Is it 500 to 1,000? And or what would you like to see as a target on the end of the 5-year window, right? This is a long-term plan. The model is built out for 10 years. Roftel's done a great job with, you know, really extrapolating out in our world from a bonding perspective, from a rate approval perspective. We're only thinking about 5, but it really is a 10-year window. So any just tea leaf indications, because we can model that and say, well, if you will let the rate jump to 750 in the first year and you want it to be at 1,500 in the 5th year, you know, we can just issue $7 million of bonds and you can afford to pay the rest with cash, right? I mean, we can reverse engineer the financing plan around a target rate structure. The extreme, obviously, and I mean, this is simple math, the lowest possible rates are 100% financing, right? Because you're able to amortize out over time. So the 500 to 1,000 is the floor. It can't go any lower than that. And you saw what the opposite was when you go 100% cash. So we can get, there's a lot that can happen in the middle of those two bands. So I mean, it'll help us come back with some realistic hybrid scenarios if you could even throw out, and it doesn't have to be a vote as much as just, hey, try this one or try that one, and then we'll take notes.
I think 1,200 was what we had said earlier. You know, my personal feeling was I would want to see something in the ballpark of 12 to 14 just to know where that gets us. Yeah, in year 5, right? We saw that the extreme was 2,400, which is way too high. The highest we have now is, I think, Tiburon, which was 1,800. So, you know, still want to be comfortably below that. You know, so I don't know, that was my personal gut, was 12 to 14 is what I would want to see in a hybrid approach, just to see what that looks like.
But also I think the idea of front loading it even more. I mean, if we're going to be getting the public's attention and telling them there are these needs that we need to meet, I think a first year to 750,
which is a 50% rate increase.
Which is a 50% rate increase. I mean, it sounds steep, but on the other hand, we got to get it going, right? And having that money, having that 50% in place, rather than waiting for your 60% to happen on year 3, that's obviously going to put a lot more money in the coffers sooner.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, well, because to me, we're asking
us
for a couple different options, right? So what I heard is there's the rip the Band-Aid off hybrid, which is, you know, I'm doing it quick, or it's like, it's 25% for all 5 years, right? But we're down the road, we save a ton of money and we're totally equipped to have another 5 or 10 year, you know, capital improvement rate, like without the attachments to a longer term decision, because we just kept wanting to keep it at rock bottom, right? And like the 25 to 25 to 25, if residents show up and say, hey, you know, that I think I'm going to need some time to understand how to incorporate this into my pay structure on a fixed income. I appreciate it's the Band-Aid being filled up a little bit slower. Then we go that way. If it's more like, hey, if we're gonna, by the end, we're gonna go this high anyway, let's just get it done, right? There's that option we can review, right? But the thing is, we don't have options. It's just,
either brought, like you said, you gave us the spectrum to understand if we're comfortable with them, right?
On these hybrids, you're gonna wind up backfilling in the sense that we sat there saying start at 750 year one, we want no more than whatever 1,200 at the end of the 5 years. You're gonna backfill going, and that's 750, that raises X amount of dollars, and the backfill would have to come from the revenue bonds.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Hey, Jordan.
And because initially that year one, we would need a minimum of 10 million, right, to get the projects going.
If for 100% financing, or 100% cash. Yes.
Well, in your bid, are you doing the 10 million up front, or are you doing structured payments?
The Paradise Pump Station project, if we award it right away, the goal is to get it completed by like September.
Okay.
Hey, Jordan, I see you working over there. Are you by chance forecasting the 750 to 1,200 scenario on the fly?
No, I'm not. I have to defer. Yeah, we can look that over. Easily input in the model, but yeah, it's something I would, to avoid errors on screen here, I would rather just do that later.
And I'm sorry, we would still probably have minimum of just 2 bond issuances.
It could only be one. If you jumpstart it, right, and again, this is off the top of my head, but if you went 50% rate increase out of the, for year one, that's gonna inject a lot of cash, which would either downsize that first series of bonds or delay it. In which case you may only do one series, right? You might only do pick a number, a $10 million series, but it's the next project, right? It's not dealing with the first pump station. So
right.
I think a good fact to have in mind would be if we had been doing regular sewage rate increases from 2010 until now, taking it to that 750 level, would that still represent a pretty slow increase over the years? I mean, we can justify to the community that if we'd had regular rate increases, we would have been here by now.
that was CPI, right?
That was CPI and construction cost index.
Yeah.
Which one?
So they looked at the ENR San Francisco Bay Area specific construction cost index.
It would currently be 7.
And they layered on inflation.
Okay, so we're there. We have justification. I mean, I know I was originally saying, can we ease it in more slowly, but now it's.
And it would go faster. So as a ratepayer, would you also please make it clear what I'm paying in years 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10? And also what am I paying in year 30? Because it's not clear to me with the bond where I could be paying $30,000 over 30 years with a bond, but I might be paying $10,000 or $15,000 if I pay it more upfront. So I'd like you to make that clear to me.
So the proposition only lets you do 5 years of increases.
But you can discuss it in terms of what you're talking about.
I guess what I'm saying is,
so
the cost of the bond, not the tax rate.
You're asking what you would be charged.
Does it go away after year 6? Or are we paying this in the next 5 years and we're done and it goes away and we're back to 750, say?
Well, on a bond, we've been assuming 30-year. But
the bond debt service, just to put it in perspective, out in years 6 through 10, those numbers that we were showing, the $2 million a year, even with 100% financing, is relatively small to your budget at that point, right? Because you've got the other CIP and you've got your operation, your O&M costs that have grown between now and year 6. And so the debt service becomes a smaller and smaller piece because it's fixed. Right? It's kind of like, again, the mortgage analogy, when you're young and you get that first mortgage, it's 100% of your paycheck. And then 10 years later, it's 75% of your paycheck. And then hopefully it gets down to 25%.
And rough numbers, the $27 million bonding situation was a 2 point something debt service.
Yeah,
so if we cut the bond in half, we're closer to $1 million, yet our annual revenue from the fees is, we're not operating at 6.71, we're operating at 8. So 1/8 is going to debt service. That's just round numbers.
Did that answer your question?
No, if I'm gonna be paying for, say over how many years I'm gonna be paying for this, can I pay it in the next 5 years and be done on just this expense, not your whole budget? Can I pay $15,000 over the next 5 years and be done and not have any debt service. So I'm not paying $30,000 over 30 years. I'm just paying $15,000 over the next 5 years. So I'm not understanding
Oh, the
how you're
yeah.
talking about.
As
It would be that we'd have to extrapolate out the rate.
So as
for
an
30
individual, the debt service is handled by the district. At year 5, that number is what carries forward unless there's another whole rate study process. That number just continues like it's continued since 2020.
The rate stays the same.
There's no debt
There's a
that you
portion
as
of
an
the rate,
individual are owed.
30 years out, that is guaranteed a payment that the sanitary district will always owe. And and it will always be a fixed payment from day one all the way through, or are they bigger? They're the same payment every time. So really, I think, and I'm not speaking for her, but I think what she wants to hear is how much does it cost her to finance it versus basically pay, or do partial financing with more cash up front, like so that she can decide as a resident whether she thinks she wants to do 7% over 30 years or 5 years of like figuring out how to come up with a little bit more each year, and but then
Special
not
assessment rather
like,
than a.
yeah.
That's like the old lady, special
Like a
assessment.
special assessment instead of a finance.
Yeah.
That's a whole other scenario.
So it's also been stated a couple different ways in different districts we work with, where you literally, the rate has, a capital component, it has an operational component, and it has a financing component or a bond component. And so to the point is that one scenario that bond component will be zero, right? Because you're paying all cash, but it's the same amount, assuming your service area doesn't change and if you represent 1% of the district, you represent 1% for the full 30 years. We could quantify how much in over 30 years you would have paid for the project financing. And then we could compare that to a 5-year window of you're overpaying, right? $500 a year, whatever it is, at the higher rates for the 5 years. So, I mean, it's academic, but we could theoretically come up with a comparison for you that would say, here's what it is if you pay cash for 5 years versus if it were financed over 30 years.
I guess I'm just asking you to be much more clear about over time, what happens to the ratepayers if you do more of the cash model versus the bonding. And I'm hearing a lot about the bonding, but I'm not hearing much about.
I think your loss is the interest paid.
What's that?
The amount of interest paid is what you end up losing by bonding.
Right. Or but then there's an inverse to that, right? Do we get better rates if we buy $27 million of finance cash versus 10? Right?
I mean, it's 4% money. Right?
It's 4% across the board, no matter how much we borrow. Right now. So then it's just how much do you draw down when you draw it down, and we'll be paying and you're paying interest on that versus not paying interest on it, but cash in hand is versus a distributed payment is something we all have to understand, right? So, but it sounds like 4%. And it's front, the bonds aren't structured where it's 4% every year. It is front loaded like a mortgage, just to be clear. Is it where there's more interest in the first payment?
Oh, the payments are the same every year, but more of it is paid as interest in the first year, the early years compared to the later years.
But that 4% also could be a blended rate, right? If we did if we wound up doing two issuances, 10 million at 4%, if rates dropped a year from now down to 3%, and we did whatever 15 million at 3%, you wind up with a blended rate.
Or you could also refinance all of it in year 3 as you tack on.
Yeah.
And can we do a 15-year mortgage versus a 30?
Well, and so my only other question with that is like we're AAA rated on the town, right? Is the sanitary district also AAA rated?
It may be just because it's a limited, it's a revenue pledge, as we mentioned earlier. So it might be just half a notch down.
But there's no way to change that, right? And because that was the thing is the finance committee identified that if we made a couple of financial steps, like a couple months ahead of time, it would get us to a AAA rating, which got us a better interest rate, right? So
yeah.
So at the same point, that's where it's like, to me, with the sanitary district, it's finance, advisory.
If you were, if
you could get that up to AAA.
If the district was sitting on $20 million right now, I would argue that you are definitely a AAA But we're showing.
20 million revenue or 20 million?
Fund balance.
Fund balance, well, we have.
Then you wouldn't need to borrow money.
Bonding.
You probably wouldn't be here.
All right, so let's wind down this discussion. RJ's been standing for 3 hours now. So let's just, we'll do just one final call for any parting questions or comments from the board and the public, and then we can wrap.
So I think to prepare the community for these, whatever it's gonna be, rate increases plus bond and whatever measure. You brought up something earlier that I think we should be getting the word out, maybe in the newsletter, that when we have these really heavy rains, because our system is fragile and in need of repairs, that we ask people to reduce their sewage use during heavy rainstorms. I think that would send out a message that, hey, something's wrong and we're going to need to fix it. You explained why. I really didn't know that. I've always thought that the problem with leaky sewer pipes is that they put sewage out. I didn't really realize it's the rain coming in that's causing the additional impact on the pipes from the water. So I just think there's some messaging opportunities for the community that we could be making now to get them ready to understand what's going on. Because obviously, other than Jean's.
We also have right now outreach being printed right now that's going to be mailed to every single property.
That says that
this week about infiltration.
Good.
We caught a lot of storm drain connect to the sewer during the project in the last few years, and some pumps that people just open, they clean out and throw in. And we have this outreach is being printing right now and should be out next week.
So if we
and also it's on the website.
Less water during heavy rainstorms if we can, because I know everyone I know of heavy rainstorm says, oh, I'm gonna go take a bath, but I can't swim in my pool. So if we need to be getting that message out there, use less water during storms.
And I think Lorraine also have a news flash from that.
Don't open the drain until it's dry out.
And just one thing, RJ, I want to thank both of you, because I know you guys did a lot of messaging between sandwich boards. I saw the message, the signs flashing. So I think you guys did a really good job with that. I just think you guys need to keep that up, so that people are just informed and they know what's going on with the rates and the direction we're headed.
Yeah, so for the next official one, they'll all get something in the mail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to throw in that question you asked about beginning and ending. I'm voting to go or suggesting to start 650 in 2025. And the reason is that gives people, most people sort of put aside a certain amount of money for their tax bill every month. And this gives them an opportunity to be ready for the next year. And so I think maybe 750 might be a lot in that first year. They're just not ready for it. And then we end up at 1250. So we're just getting it a little later down.
You can run both scenarios, right? That it's modeling.
We can run thousands.
I just want
We do not want
honestly, I want the most optimized
of $10.
most bang for the buck from our residents. Like, I don't want to have to decide which one is more palatable. I just want the best dollar value for that CPI based on what we promised to deliver. So.
And really looking at the long-term costs for people who plan to be here for 30 years, for sure.
And for the people who just got here, they pay a lot of money to get here.
Yeah. All right. We feel we've got some good parameters to work with.
Thank you, RJ.
Awesome. All right, thank you guys. Lorena, any hands up online? Okay, then we're gonna go ahead. Any last comments from our in-person guys?
I really want to know what happens with that money going to the county, because I'm paying my 1% to the county.
Right.
And if it's not going to my sewer district, I want it to go to my sewer district.
Right.
I don't want to be paying a whole lot of extra.
Right.
Because the county's holding on to my money.
Agreed.
Gene, would you be willing to make that phone call?
Absolutely.
All right.
Tell me
All right,
what to do.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and adjourn. Thank you.